The bullet wasn't meant for him. It was meant to prove she'd already become the monster he created. What happens when a woman forced into a criminal marriage discovers the only way to survive is to become exactly what she fears? This is the story of Arya Valen, a prisoner who became a queen, a victim who chose violence, and a soul who found freedom in the last place she expected. Stay until the end to see how far darkness can pull two people before they either destroy each other or become unstoppable. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wedding dress felt like a shroud. Arya Valen stood before the full-length mirror in a room that cost more than her childhood home, staring at a stranger. White silk clung to her body like a second skin, elegant and suffocating in equal measure. The dress was beautiful, obscenely so, with delicate lace that crawled up her collarbone like ivy on a tombstone. Her dark hair had been pulled back with such precision it made her head ache, every strand a reminder that nothing about this day belonged to her. Not the dress, not the venue, not even the breath in her lungs. "You look perfect, sweetheart." Her father's voice drifted from the doorway, rough, with something that might have been regret if he were capable of it. Arya didn't turn. She couldn't stomach the sight of Marcus Valen right now, the man who'd raised her, protected her, told her she was his whole world, the same man who'd signed her away like livestock to settle a debt. "Perfect," she repeated, her voice hollow. "Is that what you call a sacrifice?" Silence expanded between them, thick and choking. Through the mirror, she watched him shift his weight, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide the slump of a man who'd already surrendered. "Arya, you don't understand yet." "Then explain it to me." She spun to face him, and the careful composure she'd maintained for hours finally cracked. "Explain how selling your daughter to Lorenzo Vieri is anything but cowardice." Marcus flinched. Good. She wanted him to feel it. "He would have killed me," her father said quietly. "He would have killed everyone in our organization. The money I owed was your debt." The words exploded from her chest. "Your gambling, your schemes, your failures, and I'm the one paying for them. You'll be protected. I'll be owned." The sound of her shout seemed to echo in the ornate room, bouncing off gilt-edged furniture and crystal chandeliers that probably cost more than a year of her freedom. Arya's hands trembled at her sides, nails biting into her palms hard enough to leave crescents in her skin. Marcus stepped forward, reaching for her, but stopped when she jerked back. "Don't touch me," she whispered. "Don't you dare act like a father now." Something flickered across his face. Shame, maybe, or grief, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He straightened his shoulders, the mask of a businessman sliding back into place. "The car is waiting," he said. "It's time." "No." "Arya." I said no. She backed toward the window, her mind racing through impossible escapes. 3 stories up, guards at every exit. Her passport was gone, her phone confiscated, her friends and former life scrubbed away in the 72 hours since her father had told her the truth. She was payment for his sins. Marcus's expression hardened. "You don't have a choice." "There's always a choice. Not when the alternative is a bullet in your father's head." The words landed like a physical blow. Arya stared at him, searching for any sign that he was bluffing, but found only desperate honesty. Whatever Lorenzo Vieri was, crime lord, killer, the monster whispered about in her father's world, he'd meant his ultimatum, marriage or murder. Those were the terms. "You're a coward," Arya said softly. "I'm a survivor." Marcus moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the ornate handle. "And if you're smart, you'll learn to be one too. Lorenzo Vieri isn't a man you fight, Arya. He's a force of nature. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." "Nothing about this will ever be easy." Her father looked back at her one last time, and for just a moment she saw the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd stayed up with her during thunderstorms, who'd promised he'd always keep her safe. Then he opened the door and left her alone with her reflection. The ceremony was held in a private estate that looked like it had been ripped from a Renaissance painting. All marble columns and manicured gardens, wealth displayed with the casual arrogance of those who'd never known anything else. Arya walked down the aisle on legs that felt disconnected from her body, her father's hand on her elbow, a brand she couldn't shake off. Faces watched her pass. She didn't recognize any of them. Lorenzo's people, probably. Associates, soldiers, the various moving parts of a criminal empire she was about to become a decoration in. and at the end of the aisle, waiting with the patience of a predator, stood Lorenzo Vieri himself. Arya had seen pictures, grainy surveillance photos her father had shown her in a weak attempt to prepare her for this. But photographs couldn't capture presence, and Lorenzo Vieri had presence the way hurricanes had wind. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit tailored with such precision it looked like armor. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and harder edges, high cheekbones, a jaw that could have been carved from granite, and eyes that tracked her approach with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Not brown, not quite black, but something in between. Coal before it ignited. He didn't smile, didn't offer any false warmth or pretend this was anything other than what it was, a transaction. When she reached the altar, her father placed her hand in Lorenzo's and stepped back without a word. The touch was brief, impersonal, but Arya felt the calluses on his palm, the controlled strength in his grip. This was a man who'd built his empire with his own hands, who'd killed and conquered and claimed until the world bent around him. And now he was claiming her. The officiant began speaking, some hired priest or judge Arya didn't know and didn't care. The words washed over her in a meaningless stream of tradition and ceremony, all of it a veneer over the ugly truth. She heard herself respond when prompted, her voice distant and mechanical. "I do." 2 words that sealed her fate. Lorenzo's response was quiet, almost casual. "I do." Then he was sliding a ring onto her finger, platinum and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. And the officiant was pronouncing them married, and it was done. Finished. The trap had closed, and Arya Valen had ceased to exist. In her place stood Arya Vieri, possession of a man she didn't know, prisoner in a life she'd never chosen. Lorenzo leaned in, and for one horrible moment, Arya thought he was going to kiss her. Instead, his mouth moved close to her ear, his breath warm against her skin. "Don't run," he said quietly. "You won't make it far, and I don't like repeating myself." Then he pulled back, took her hand, and led her back down the aisle through applause that sounded like mockery. Chat. The reception was a blur of expensive champagne and forced congratulations. Arya moved through it like a ghost, smiling when expected, accepting well wishes from people who knew exactly what this marriage was and didn't care. Lorenzo stayed close, his hand occasionally settling on the small of her back, a gesture that looked protective but felt like a leash. She barely touched the food, couldn't stomach it. Every bite would have tasted like surrender. "You should eat," Lorenzo said during a rare moment when they were relatively alone at their table. His voice was deep, accented with something European she couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe? "The night will be long." Arya's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. "I'm not hungry." "Suit yourself." He returned to a conversation with a gray-haired man on his other side, leaving Arya to her thoughts. She studied him from the corner of her eye, trying to understand the man she'd been shackled to. Lorenzo commanded the space around him effortlessly, his words precise and measured, his expressions minimal. People leaned in when he spoke, laughed when he made what passed for jokes, and never, never interrupted him. This was a man accustomed to absolute authority. The realization settled in her stomach like lead. Fighting him would be like fighting gravity, futile and ultimately self-destructive. But the alternative was accepting this new reality, letting herself become another ornament in his collection of controlled things. Arya's gaze drifted to the exits. 3 main doors, all monitored by men in dark suits who didn't bother hiding the weapons under their jackets. Windows along the eastern wall, but they were on the 2nd floor of the estate. Guards outside, she was certain. Lorenzo Vieri didn't leave anything to chance. Planning an escape already? She jerked her attention back to find Lorenzo watching her, those dark eyes missing nothing. "I was admiring the architecture," she lied. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "The architecture, of course." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with that same unnerving intensity. "Let me save you some time, Arya. Every exit is monitored. Every window is alarmed. My men are loyal, well-trained, and instructed to prevent you from leaving. If you somehow manage to get past all of that, you have no phone, no money, and no identification. You wouldn't make it to the highway. You seem very confident." "I'm very thorough." Arya forced herself to meet his gaze, to not look away from the challenge she saw there. "You can't watch me every second of every day." "No," Lorenzo agreed. "But I don't need to." You'll learn quickly enough that running only makes things worse. Is that a threat? It's a fact. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the dark liquid with casual elegance. I don't make threats, Mrs. Vieri. I make promises. And I promise you, any attempt to leave will end with you exactly where you started. The only difference will be your understanding of how limited your options truly are. The name, Mrs. Vieri, sent a spike of anger through her chest. She wanted to throw the champagne in his face, to scream, to do anything that would crack that infuriating calm. But she'd seen the way his men moved, the way they watched her. Violence wouldn't save her. It would only prove his point. So instead she smiled, sweet and poisonous. I'm sure you're used to people obeying you without question. That must be convenient. Very. Well, I'm not one of your soldiers, Mr. Vieri, and I didn't take vows of loyalty to your empire. I took vows because the alternative was my father's execution. There's a difference. Something shifted in Lorenzo's expression. Not anger, but something colder, more calculating. You're right, he said quietly. You're not one of my soldiers. You're my wife, which means you're bound to me by something much more permanent than loyalty. Marriage can be dissolved. Not this one. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Arya's pulse hammered in her throat, but she kept her expression neutral. Giving him the satisfaction of seeing her fear felt like losing ground she couldn't afford to surrender. A photographer approached their table, camera in hand, asking for pictures of the happy couple. Lorenzo stood smoothly, extending his hand to Arya with the practiced grace of a man who'd performed this theater 1,000 times. She took his hand because refusing would cause a scene, and she was learning, fast, that Lorenzo Vieri valued control above all else. Making a spectacle would only give him an excuse to tighten his grip. They posed, his arm around her waist, her hand on his chest, both of them wearing expressions that might have passed for contentment if you didn't look too closely. The camera flashed, capturing lies for posterity. Beautiful, the photographer gushed. Absolutely beautiful. One more. Kiss for the camera? Arya's entire body tensed. Lorenzo must have felt it because his hand pressed more firmly against her lower back, holding her in place. Smile, Mrs. Vieri, he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. This is supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tender, it was acclaiming, pure and simple. His mouth on hers, firm and demanding, tasting like wine and something darker she couldn't name. Arya's hands came up instinctively, pushing against his chest, but he didn't move. Didn't break the kiss until he was ready, until the photographer had gotten his shot and the nearby guests had erupted in approving applause. When Lorenzo finally pulled back, his eyes held a warning. Don't fight me in public, he said quietly. You won't like the consequences. Arya's lips burned where he'd kissed her, anger and humiliation warring in her chest. You don't get to touch me like that. I'm your husband. I can touch you however I want. Try it again without an audience and I'll break your nose. For the first time since she'd met him, Lorenzo smiled. Actually smiled. A flash of white teeth that should have been charming but instead looked predatory. There she is, he said softly. I was beginning to think you'd given up already. Before Arya could respond, he was guiding her away from the photographer, back into the crowd of guests who parted around them like water around stone. She felt their eyes on her, assessing, judging, already writing her off as another foolish girl who'd gotten in over her head with Lorenzo Vieri. Maybe they were right. The reception dragged on for hours, toasts and dances and an endless parade of people congratulating Lorenzo on his beautiful bride, as if she were a prize he'd won rather than a person he'd purchased. Arya endured it all with a smile that felt like it was cracking her face in half, counting down the minutes until this nightmare ended. Except it wasn't going to end. Not tonight. Not ever. Because when the reception finally wound down and the guests began to depart, Lorenzo's hand settled on her elbow with gentle, immovable pressure. Time to go, he said. The car was a black Mercedes with windows tinted so dark Arya couldn't see inside until Lorenzo opened the door for her. She hesitated on the threshold, some animal part of her brain screaming that getting in that car was a line she couldn't uncross. Arya. Lorenzo's voice was patient, but underneath it ran a current of steel. Don't make this difficult. She looked back at the estate one last time. Her father was nowhere to be seen, probably already left, eager to escape the evidence of his betrayal. The remaining guests were filtered out through other exits, their laughter and conversation fading into the evening air. No one was coming to save her. Arya got in the car. Lorenzo slid in beside her, and the door closed with a sound like a vault ceiling. The driver pulled away from the estate smoothly, and Arya watched through the tinted windows as her old life disappeared behind them. The silence in the car was suffocating. Lorenzo seemed content to let it stretch, his attention on his phone as he dealt with some business she wasn't privy to. Arya focused on breathing, on keeping herself together for just a little longer. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "My penthouse." Lorenzo didn't look up from his phone. "It's secure, comfortable, and has everything you'll need." "You mean everything you think I'll need?" "Is there a difference?" "Yes." Now he did look at her, something almost like curiosity flickering across his features. "What do you need, Arya?" "Freedom, autonomy, her life back." But saying any of that would be pointless, so she settled for my own space. "You'll have your own room if you want it. I'm not interested in forcing intimacy." His gaze returned to his phone. "Despite what you might think, I'm not a monster. You threatened to kill my father if I didn't marry you. What would you call that?" "Business." The casual way he said it, as if threatening murder was just another transaction, made something cold settle in Arya's chest. This was who Lorenzo Vieri was, a man who separated the world into assets and liabilities, who made decisions based on power and profit rather than morality. And she was married to him. The drive took 40 minutes, winding through the city, until they reached a high-rise that dominated the skyline. Lorenzo's building. The car pulled into a private garage, and they took an elevator that required a key card to access the top floor. The penthouse was exactly what Arya expected: sleek, modern, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that would have been breathtaking under different circumstances. The furniture was designer, the art on the walls probably worth more than most people made in a year. It was beautiful and sterile, a showpiece rather than a home. "Your room is down that hall," Lorenzo said, gesturing to the left. "The staff will bring your things up tomorrow. For tonight, there should be everything you need in the closet and bathroom." Arya turned to face him, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Pretending to be civilized. We both know what this is." Lorenzo removed his jacket, draping it over the back of a chair with precise care. Beneath it, his white shirt was crisp and unwrinkled despite the long day. He loosened his tie, and the simple gesture felt oddly intimate in the quiet of the penthouse. "What do you think this is?" he asked. "A cage." "Then what does that make me?" "The warden." Lorenzo's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sharpened. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides, stopping just inside her personal space, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact, far enough that it wasn't quite threatening. "Let me be very clear about something, Arya," he said quietly. "I didn't want a wife. I don't need one. What I needed was to tie up a loose end, and your father gave me an opportunity to do that in a way that benefited both of us. You are not a prisoner. You are my wife, which comes with certain expectations and certain protections." "Protections?" Arya laughed, the sound bitter. "You mean restrictions?" "In my world, they're the same thing." He reached up, and Arya forced herself not to flinch as his fingers brushed her cheek, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, almost tender, which somehow made it worse. "You will not be harmed. You will not be disrespected by anyone in my organization. You will have everything you could want: clothes, jewelry, entertainment, education if you desire it. All I ask in return is that you play your role." "What role is that?" "Mrs. Lorenzo Vieri, my partner in public, my wife on paper." His hand dropped away. "What happens in private is negotiable." Arya searched his face for any sign of deception, but found only that same controlled calm. "And if I refuse? If I can't play that role? Then you'll learn to." Lorenzo stepped back, giving her space again. "I'm not asking for your love, Arya. I'm not even asking for your affection, but I am requiring your cooperation. Fight me, and I will win, every time. Accept this new reality, and you might find it's not as terrible as you imagine." "You're wrong," Arya said. "It's worse, because at least in a cage I'd know exactly where the bars were. This..." She gestured at the expensive penthouse, at him, at everything. This is worse because you're asking me to pretend, to smile and act like I chose this. Yes, Lorenzo agreed simply. That's exactly what I'm asking. The honesty of it stole her breath. No manipulation, no false promises, just the cold truth laid bare between them. Arya turned away, unable to look at him anymore. I need to be alone. Of course. She heard him move toward what she assumed was his own room. Good night, Mrs. Vieri. The title made her want to scream. Instead, she walked stiffly to the room he'd indicated as hers, closing the door behind her with controlled precision. Only when she was alone did she let herself fall apart. She made it to the ensuite bathroom before the first sob broke free. Braced against the marble sink, Arya stared at her reflection, at the stranger in the wedding dress with smudged makeup and devastated eyes, and finally let herself cry. For her freedom, for her future, for the girl she'd been this morning who'd still believed somehow that this could be stopped. That girl was gone now, dead and buried under silk and diamonds and vows she'd never wanted to take. When the tears finally stopped, Arya washed her face and systematically destroyed the wedding dress. It took effort. The fabric was quality, designed to last. But she managed to rip the delicate lace, tear the silk, reduce it to ruined scraps that she left in a pile on the bathroom floor. It was petty, pointless. But it was also the only act of defiance available to her, and she took savage satisfaction in it. Wearing only her undergarments, Arya explored the closet Lorenzo had mentioned. He hadn't lied. It was fully stocked with clothes in her size, everything from casual wear to evening gowns, all with the tag still attached. She grabbed the first thing that looked comfortable, soft cotton pajamas, and pulled them on. Then she returned to the bedroom and assessed her surroundings with new eyes. The window didn't open. She checked. Some kind of security feature, probably. The door locked from the inside but not the outside. She could keep Lorenzo out, but he could get in if he wanted to badly enough. There was a phone on the nightstand. Arya picked it up, her heart jumping, but of course it was restricted, only able to call internal numbers within the building. No outside line, no way to reach anyone who might help. Not that there was anyone to call. Her friends wouldn't understand. The police were likely in Lorenzo's pocket, and her father was the reason she was here in the first place. Arya was truly alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, a massive thing with sheets that probably cost more than her old car, and tried to think. Lorenzo had made the rules clear: cooperate or suffer, play the role or face consequences. But he'd also revealed something, perhaps without meaning to. He didn't want a wife, didn't need one. This was about control, about tying up loose ends, about maintaining the appearance of power, which meant he had weaknesses, blind spots, places where his absolute authority didn't quite reach. Arya just had to find them. The thought gave her something to hold on to, a thread of purpose in the chaos. She wasn't going to accept this, wasn't going to become another decoration in Lorenzo Vieri's perfectly controlled life. She would learn his world, understand his rules, and find a way to break them, or die trying. Arya didn't remember falling asleep, but she must have, because she woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize. For one blissful moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came crashing back. The wedding. Lorenzo. The penthouse. Her new life in a cage made of luxury. She lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling and trying to summon the energy to move. Every part of her ached, her head from crying, her body from tension, her heart from grief. But lying in bed wouldn't change anything. Arya forced herself up and threw a shower that was entirely too nice to properly resent. The bathroom was stocked with high-end products, everything she could possibly need, all of it chosen by someone who'd probably studied her preferences. The violation of that, someone going through her life, cataloging her habits, made her skin crawl. She dressed in jeans and a simple shirt from the closet, refusing to touch anything too expensive or elegant. If Lorenzo wanted her to play dress-up, he'd have to ask. She wasn't going to perform without prompting. The bedroom door was still locked from the inside. Arya took a breath, steeling herself, then opened it. The penthouse was quiet. Morning light filled the main living area, making everything look softer, less threatening. Arya moved cautiously through the space, half expecting Lorenzo to appear, but the place seemed empty. She found the kitchen, industrial and pristine, barely used, and evidence that someone had been there recently. Fresh coffee in the pot. A plate and mug in the sink. A note on the counter in sharp, precise handwriting. Help yourself to anything you need. I'll be back this evening. L. Arya crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. She poured herself coffee and explored the rest of the penthouse. 3 bedrooms total, Lorenzo's, hers, and a guest room. An office with a door that was locked. A media room, a gym. Everything a person could want, all of it meaningless. The front door required a code she didn't have. The elevator needed that same keycard Lorenzo had used last night. She was locked in, just as thoroughly as if there were actual bars on the windows. Arya returned to the living room, coffee in hand, and stared out at the city below. Somewhere down there, people were living normal lives, going to work, meeting friends, making choices that actually belonged to them. She used to be one of those people. The sound of the elevator pulled her from her thoughts. Arya turned, adrenaline spiking, but it wasn't Lorenzo who stepped into the penthouse. It was a woman, middle-aged, professionally dressed, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression of cool efficiency. "Mrs. Vieri," she said with a polite nod. "I'm Elena. Mr. Vieri asked me to check on you and see if you need anything." Arya set her coffee down carefully. "I need to leave." "I'm afraid that's not possible." "Then I don't need anything." Elena's expression didn't change. "Mr. Vieri wanted me to inform you that your belongings from your father's house will arrive this afternoon. If there's anything else you require, clothes, books, electronics, I can arrange it." "I require my freedom." "Anything else?" Elena repeated, as if Arya hadn't spoken. The casual dismissal of her autonomy made something snap inside Arya. She crossed the distance between them in quick strides, stopping directly in front of the other woman. "I am not a doll to be dressed and arranged," Arya said quietly, dangerously. "I am a human being who was forced into this situation against my will, and I will not cooperate with the pretense that any of this is normal or acceptable." Elena met her gaze without flinching. "Mr. Vieri anticipated you might feel this way. He asked me to remind you that fighting him will only make things more difficult for everyone involved." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice." Arya laughed, the sound sharp and humorless. "Tell Lorenzo that I don't want his advice. I don't want his clothes or his gifts or his fake concern. What I want is to walk out that door and never see him again." "I'll pass along your message," Elena said with the same unflappable calm. "Is there anything else?" The futility of it all pressed down on Arya like a physical weight. This woman wasn't an ally, wasn't even sympathetic. She was another cog in Lorenzo's machine, following orders without question or conscience. "No," Arya said finally. "There's nothing else." Elena nodded and moved toward the elevator. She paused at the threshold, looking back. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Vieri, resistance will only hurt you. Mr. Vieri always wins. Always. The sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be." Then she was gone, and Arya was alone again with her rage and helplessness. She spent the rest of the day systematically searching the penthouse for anything useful. Weapons, but the knives in the kitchen were all accounted for and likely monitored. Electronics, but every device was password protected or restricted. Money, but she found none, not even pocket change. Lorenzo had thought of everything. Her belongings arrived in the afternoon, delivered by silent men in dark suits who brought boxes of her clothes, books, and personal items. They set everything in her room and left without a word, and Arya was left sorting through the pieces of her old life that now felt like they belonged to someone else. She found her laptop, but of course the penthouse Wi-Fi was password protected. Her phone was there too, but when she turned it on, she discovered the SIM card was missing. Useless. Every avenue of escape or contact had been systematically cut off. By the time evening approached, Arya had moved from anger to something colder, more focused. Lorenzo wanted her to break, to accept her new reality and fall in line. He expected tears or tantrums or desperate pleas. She would give him none of those things. The elevator chimed at 7, and Lorenzo Vieri stepped into his penthouse looking exactly as controlled and composed as he had the night before. He'd traded the wedding suit for business attire, charcoal gray, crisp white shirt, no tie. He looked like what he was, a man who commanded empires and crushed anyone who stood in his way. His gaze found Arya immediately, assessing. "How was your day?" he asked, as if this were a normal marriage and she were a normal wife. Arya stood from where she'd been reading on the couch. "Your assistant delivered my things. I thought you'd want familiar items around you. What I want is irrelevant, apparently." Lorenzo moved to the bar, pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey with practiced ease. "Elena said you were uncooperative." "Elena can go to hell." She's just doing her job. Her job is helping you keep me prisoner. Lorenzo took a drink, watching her over the rim of his glass. You're not a prisoner, Arya. You're my wife. Same thing. No, he said quietly. It's not. A prisoner has no choices. You have choices. You're simply refusing to make them. Arya's hands clenched at her sides. What choices? Obey or suffer? That's not choice. That's coercion. Then what would you like? Lorenzo set his glass down and faced her fully. Tell me, what would make this bearable for you? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected dismissal, maybe anger, but not this. Not what almost sounded like genuine curiosity. I want to leave, she said. Not an option. Then there's nothing you can give me that I want. Try again. Arya studied him, searching for the trap in the offer, but Lorenzo's expression remained neutral, waiting. Freedom of movement, she said finally. I want to be able to leave this penthouse without an escort, to go where I want, when I want. Done. She blinked. What? I'll have a car and driver assigned to you. He'll take you anywhere you want to go within the city. You'll have a credit card with no limit. Consider it yours. I don't want your money. Nevertheless, you'll have it. Lorenzo picked up his drink again. What else? This is a trick. It's not. You're just going to let me wander around the city unsupervised? No, Lorenzo said. You'll have a security detail. 2 men, discreet. They won't interfere with your activities, but they will ensure your safety. You mean they'll report back to you about everywhere I go? Yes. At least he was honest about it. Arya processed this new information, trying to find the angle. Lorenzo wasn't the type to give anything without getting something in return. What do you want in exchange? She asked. Your presence at business dinners and social events when required? Your cooperation in maintaining the image of our marriage in public? He paused. And your word that you won't attempt to run? My word? Arya laughed. You think my word means anything? I think you're many things, Arya, but I don't believe you're a liar. Lorenzo's dark eyes held hers. Give me your word that you won't try to leave the city or contact authorities, and I'll give you the freedom to move through it as you please. It was more than she'd expected, more than she'd thought he'd ever offer, but it was also still a cage, just a bigger one. And if I refuse, then you stay here, in this penthouse, with Elena bringing you whatever you need. No car, no credit card, no illusion of autonomy. Lorenzo's expression didn't change. The choice is yours. There it was. The trap. He was offering her just enough freedom to make staying bearable, just enough autonomy to make resistance seem pointless. And in exchange, all he wanted was her compliance in public and her promise not to run. Arya thought about her options. She could refuse, stay locked in this beautiful prison, and wait for an opportunity that might never come. Or she could accept, take what freedom he was offering, and use it to find another way out. I want one more thing, she said. Lorenzo tilted his head slightly. Which is? Answers. If you want me to play this role to stand beside you at your business dinners and smile for your associates, then I want to understand what I'm part of. I want the truth about who you are and what you do. For the first time, something like surprise crossed Lorenzo's features. You want to know about my business? I want to know what I'm married to. Silence stretched between them, heavy with calculation. Arya could see him weighing the request, deciding how much truth she could handle or deserved. All right, he said finally. Ask your questions. What exactly do you do, Lorenzo? What is this empire built on? He finished his whiskey, set the glass down with deliberate care. I run a diversified organization. Some of it is legitimate, real estate, restaurants, import-export businesses. Some of it exists in gray areas, gambling, protection services. And some of it, he paused. Some of it is what people call criminal, weapons, information, influence. You mean you're a crime lord? I mean I'm a businessman who operates outside traditional legal structures when those structures don't serve my interests. That's semantics. That's reality. Lorenzo moved closer, and Arya forced herself not to retreat. I don't pretend to be something I'm not, Arya. I've built what I have through intelligence, ruthlessness, and an understanding that the world runs on power, not morality. People need things they can't get legally. I provide those things. In return, I profit. And killing? Is that part of providing services? His expression hardened. Sometimes. Have you killed people? Yes. The simple admission sent ice through her veins. Arya had known, logically, that Lorenzo was dangerous, but hearing him confirm it so casually made it real in a way it hadn't been before. How many? She asked. I stopped counting years ago. Doesn't it bother you? Lorenzo studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Would you prefer I lie? Tell you I'm haunted by every life I've taken, that I lose sleep over moral implications? I prefer you feel something. I feel plenty, he said quietly, but guilt isn't among those emotions. Every person I've killed was a threat, to me, to my people, to my interests. I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't regret it either. That's the difference between men like me and men like your father. I don't make messes I'm not willing to clean up. Arya's jaw tightened at the mention of her father. My father is a coward, but at least he didn't build his life on violence. No, he just benefited from mine, used my resources, my connections, my protection, and when it came time to pay his debts, he offered me the one thing he had left of value. Lorenzo's gaze raked over her. You. I'm not a thing. No, he agreed. You're a complication, an asset I didn't plan for and don't quite know what to do with. But you're mine now, Arya. That's the reality we're both living in. The possessiveness in his voice should have terrified her. Instead, it sparked something else, a defiant anger that burned away the fear. I will never be yours, she said. You can own the ring on my finger and the name on paper, but you will never own me. Lorenzo smiled then, that same predatory expression from the wedding. We'll see. Before Arya could respond, he turned and headed toward his room. Think about my offer. Freedom to move through the city in exchange for your cooperation and your word. You have until morning to decide. Then he was gone, leaving Arya alone with a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She stood there for a long time, staring at nothing, her mind racing. Lorenzo had confirmed everything she'd feared and worse. He was a killer, a criminal, a man who saw violence as simply another business tool. And she was tied to him legally, financially, in every way that mattered. But he'd also offered her something she desperately needed: freedom of movement, limited, monitored, conditional, but still more than she had now. Arya thought about running, about taking whatever freedom he gave her and using it to disappear, but his warning echoed in her mind. You won't make it far. And she believed him. Lorenzo Vieri was a man who planned for every contingency, who'd built an empire on never being surprised. If she ran, he would catch her, and then whatever small mercies he was offering now would disappear. No, running wasn't the answer, not yet. But learning, understanding his world, his weaknesses, his blind spots, that was something she could do. Lorenzo thought he was being generous, offering her supervised freedom. He didn't realize he was giving her exactly what she needed: access. Arya walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere down there, in the maze of streets and buildings, there had to be a way out of this. Someone who could help. Some avenue Lorenzo hadn't thought to block. She would find it. But first, she had to make him believe she'd accepted her fate. When morning came, Arya found Lorenzo in the kitchen, dressed for business and drinking coffee like they were a normal couple, sharing a normal morning. I've made my decision, she said. Lorenzo looked up, his expression giving nothing away. And? I'll take your offer. Freedom of movement in exchange for public cooperation. She held his gaze. And I give you my word I won't attempt to leave the city or contact authorities. It wasn't technically a lie. She wouldn't try to leave the city, not until she had a real plan. And she wouldn't contact authorities who were likely on his payroll anyway. But that didn't mean she was giving up, just biding her time. Lorenzo studied her for a long moment, and Arya wondered if he could see through her performance. But finally, he nodded. Fair enough. I'll have everything arranged by this afternoon. Elena will provide you with a phone, credit card, and the details of your driver and security team. Thank you. The words tasted like ash, but Arya forced them out anyway. This was the role he wanted her to play. Cooperative wife, grateful prisoner. So she would play it, for now. Lorenzo finished his coffee and grabbed his jacket. I have meetings today, but I'll be back for dinner. We have an event tomorrow night, a charity gala. I'll need you there. Of course. He paused at the door, looking back at her with something that might have been approval or might have been suspicion. You're smarter than your father gave you credit for. My father doesn't know me as well as he thinks he does. No, Lorenzo agreed. I don't think he does. Then he was gone, and Arya was left alone with her plans and her simmering rage. She had bought herself freedom of movement. Now she just had to figure out how to use it. The game had begun, and Arya Vieri was determined to win. The driver's name was Marco, and he had the personality of a brick wall. When Elena introduced them that afternoon in the building's private garage, he nodded once, opened the rear door of a sleek black sedan, and waited without a word. Marco has been with Mr. Vieri for 8 years, Elena explained, her tablet clutched against her chest like armor. He's completely trustworthy and knows the city intimately. Your security detail will follow in a separate vehicle. You won't need to interact with them directly. Arya slid into the back seat, the leather cool against her legs. Where exactly am I allowed to go? Anywhere within city limits, Elena said. Shopping districts, restaurants, museums, parks. Mr. Vieri simply requests that you check in periodically and return before 10 in the evening. A curfew. Of course. Even Lorenzo's generosity came with strings attached. And if I'm not back by 10? Elena's expression remained neutral. I would strongly advise against testing that particular boundary, Mrs. Vieri. The door closed, sealing Arya inside with Marco's silent presence in the front seat. Through the rear-view mirror, his eyes met hers, flat, assessing, utterly devoid of sympathy. Where to? He asked. Arya almost laughed. Where did someone go when they'd been given the freedom to go nowhere that mattered? She couldn't contact friends. Lorenzo would know immediately. Couldn't go to the police, they were likely compromised. Couldn't even leave the city without triggering whatever surveillance net he'd woven around her. Just drive, she said finally. I want to see the city. Marco pulled out of the garage without comment, and Arya watched through tinted windows as the world she'd been locked away from unfolded around them. The city was the same as it had always been. Crowded streets, desperate pedestrians, buildings stacked on buildings like a monument to human ambition. But seeing it from inside Lorenzo's car, protected by his people and his power, it all looked different somehow, smaller, more contained. They drove through the financial district where men in expensive suits hurried between glass towers, past the warehouse district where Lorenzo probably conducted his less legitimate business. Through neighborhoods that shifted from wealthy to working class and back again, the city's economic geography laid bare. Arya studied it all with new eyes. This was Lorenzo's kingdom. Every street corner could have one of his people. Every business might owe him money or loyalty or both. She'd known abstractly that he was powerful, but seeing the scope of it, the sheer size of the territory he controlled, made her understand just how trapped she really was. Pull over there, she said suddenly, pointing to a small park wedged between 2 apartment buildings. Marco did as ordered, and the security car following them stopped half a block back. Arya got out, drawing a sharp breath of air that didn't taste like expensive leather and careful control. The park was nothing special. A few benches, some struggling trees, a playground where children shrieked with the kind of unselfconscious joy she barely remembered feeling. She walked to an empty bench and sat, Marco taking up position a respectful distance away, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to maintain the illusion of privacy. Arya watched the children play, their mothers chatting nearby, oblivious to the surveillance happening around them. This was supposed to be freedom, but it felt like another kind of cage, one without visible bars but just as confining. Her new phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Lorenzo. How are you enjoying your first day of freedom? Arya's fingers tightened around the device. She wanted to throw it, to smash it against the pavement and grind the pieces under her heel. Instead, she typed back, "It's everything I dreamed of." The sarcasm was perhaps unwise, but she couldn't help herself. 3 dots appeared immediately, Lorenzo typing his response. Careful, Mrs. Vieri. Sarcasm doesn't translate well over text. Then maybe we shouldn't communicate this way. Would you prefer I call? I'd prefer you leave me alone. A longer pause this time. Then, enjoy your afternoon. Remember, back by 10. Arya shoved the phone back in her pocket and tried to focus on the normalcy around her. But Lorenzo's presence was inescapable, even in his absence. He was in the driver waiting by the car, the security detail watching from their vehicle, the phone that let him reach her whenever he wanted. She couldn't escape him because he'd made himself part of the infrastructure of her new life. Mrs. Vieri? Arya looked up to find Marco approaching, his expression unchanged, but something urgent in his posture. What? We should move. This area isn't secure. It's a park. It's an exposed position with limited exit routes and too many civilians. His hand had moved inside his jacket, toward a weapon, Arya realized with a jolt. Please return to the car. She wanted to refuse on principle, but the cold professionalism in Marco's voice suggested this wasn't negotiable. Arya stood and followed him back to the sedan, catching a glimpse of the security detail repositioning their vehicle to block potential approaches. This was her freedom. Constantly monitored, perpetually assessed for threats, never truly alone. Once back in the car, Marco pulled into traffic with smooth efficiency. Where would you like to go now? Arya stared out the window, feeling the weight of her situation settle deeper into her bones. Home, she said quietly, then hated herself for the word. Lorenzo's penthouse wasn't home. Would never be home. But it was the only place she could go. They drove back in silence, and Arya spent the time trying to reconcile what she'd learned today with what she needed to do. Running wasn't an option. Lorenzo's reach was too extensive, his resources too vast. Fighting him directly would be suicide, which left her with only one real choice. She had to become what he least expected. Not a prisoner, not a victim, but something else entirely. The thought crystallized as they pulled into the building's garage. If Lorenzo wanted a wife who played her role, she would play it, but on her terms, in her own way, learning everything she could about his world while appearing to accept her place in it. It was a long game, and she had no idea if it would work, but it was better than surrendering. Elena was waiting when Arya entered the penthouse, her expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Vieri. Mr. Vieri called to say he'll be late tonight. Business complications. He suggests you eat without him. How considerate. If Elena registered the sarcasm, she didn't show it. Also, your gown for tomorrow's gala has arrived. I've had it hung in your closet. If the fit isn't perfect, we can have alterations done in the morning. What gala? Arya asked, though she remembered Lorenzo mentioning something about it. A charity event benefiting children's hospitals, very high profile. Several city officials will be in attendance, along with business leaders and society figures. Elena consulted her tablet. Mr. Vieri's presence is expected, and as his wife, so is yours. Arya's mind immediately started calculating. High profile meant witnesses. City officials meant people not directly on Lorenzo's payroll. It wasn't an opportunity to escape. Security would be too tight. But it was a chance to observe, to understand how Lorenzo operated in public, to see the mechanisms of his power on display. What time? She asked. 7 o'clock. Cocktails first, then dinner and dancing. Mr. Vieri will want to leave by 11. 4 hours of performing the role of devoted wife. Arya could manage that. She'd manage the wedding, after all. Fine, she said. Is there anything else? Mr. Vieri requested I remind you that comportment is essential tomorrow evening. Many eyes will be watching. I know how to behave in public, Elena. I'm sure you do, Mrs. Vieri, but the doubt in her voice was clear. Will you be dining alone tonight, or shall I have something prepared for you? The solicitous concern felt like mockery. I can feed myself. Elena nodded and retreated, leaving Arya alone in the cavernous penthouse. The silence pressed in around her, broken only by the distant hum of the city beyond the windows. Arya moved through the space like a ghost, eventually finding herself in the kitchen where she made a sandwich she didn't want and sat at the counter to eat it mechanically. Her phone buzzed again. Lorenzo. Elena says you were difficult. Elena says a lot of things. She's trying to help. She's trying to manage me. There's a difference. Another pause. Then, tomorrow night is important. I need you focused. I understand the assignment. Do you? Arya set the phone down, her appetite completely gone. Lorenzo was testing her, pushing to see how far she'd bend before breaking. He thought he understood her, thought she was just another problem to be managed with the right application of pressure and incentive. He was wrong. She spent the evening exploring the penthouse more thoroughly, looking for anything she might have missed before. Lorenzo's office remained locked, but she examined the lock itself, memorizing its configuration. Eventually, she'd find a way in. The media room had a computer, but it was password protected and probably logged every keystroke. Still, it was something to remember. The gym contained expensive equipment, and a locked cabinet that likely held weapons. Another thing to note. By the time Arya finally retreated to her room, she had a better mental map of the space and its possibilities. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. She just changed into pajamas when she heard the elevator. Lorenzo was home. Arya stayed in her room listening to the sounds of him moving through the penthouse, the clink of a glass, water running in the kitchen, his footsteps approaching her door. They paused outside, and she held her breath, waiting. A soft knock. "Arya?" She didn't answer. "I know you're awake." His voice was quiet through the door, stripped of its usual command. "May I come in?" "No." A long silence. Then, "Tomorrow's event is crucial. These are people who need to see us as a united front. Can you do that?" "I said I would." "That's not what I asked." Arya crossed to the door, her hand on the knob but not opening it. "What do you want, Lorenzo? Reassurance? A promise that I'll smile and play pretend and make you look good in front of your colleagues? I want to know if you're going to cause problems. Define problems. Arya." Frustration bled into his tone. "I'm trying to make this work." "No," she said. "You're trying to make me work. There's a difference." "Why?" She heard him exhale, a sound that might have been exhaustion or exasperation. "Get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning." His footsteps retreated, and Arya stood there with her hand still on the knob, something tight and complicated churning in her chest. Lorenzo kept trying to frame this as a partnership, as if they were on the same side working toward a common goal. But they weren't. They would never be. He was her captor, no matter how gilded the cage. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Arya lay in the expensive sheets, staring at the ceiling and thinking about tomorrow. The gala represented her first real test, not just of her ability to play the role Lorenzo demanded, but of her capacity to operate in his world without losing herself entirely. When morning finally arrived, she felt hollowed out and raw. But there was no time for weakness. Elena appeared at 9 with coffee and a schedule for the day, talking Arya through hair appointments and final dress fittings like they were preparing for a society wedding instead of a performance. "The stylist will arrive at 2, Elena explained. "Hair and makeup will take approximately 3 hours. Mr. Vieri has requested you wear your hair up to showcase the necklace he's selected." "He selected my jewelry?" "Of course, it's part of the presentation." Presentation. That's all Arya was. A carefully curated accessory to Lorenzo's image. The morning dragged on with painful slowness. Lorenzo was gone before she emerged from her room, leaving only a note on the counter. "Looking forward to tonight. L." The presumption in those words made her want to scream. But she didn't scream. She drank her coffee, picked at breakfast, and waited for the parade of people who would transform her into whoever Lorenzo needed her to be. The stylist arrived precisely at 2, accompanied by 2 assistants and enough equipment to style an entire wedding party. Arya submitted to their ministrations with gritted teeth, letting them pull and pin her hair into an elaborate updo, paint her face with layers of makeup, and generally treat her like a doll. "Bellissima," the stylist pronounced when they'd finished, spinning Arya toward the mirror. The woman staring back was unrecognizable. Her hair gleamed under the lights, swept up to expose the column of her neck. Her makeup was flawless. Smoky eyes, sharp cheekbones, lips painted a deep red that looked almost dangerous. She looked sophisticated, polished, expensive. She looked like Lorenzo Vieri's wife. "The dress now," the stylist commanded, and her assistants brought out the gown Elena had mentioned. It was stunning. Midnight blue silk that caught the light like water, cut to cling to every curve before flowing out from the hips. The neckline was modest by evening standards, but the back plunged dramatically, leaving her skin bare from shoulders to waist. Arya stepped into it with the assistant's help, and they zipped her in with practiced efficiency. The dress fit perfectly. Of course it did. Lorenzo wouldn't accept anything less. "The necklace," the stylist said, producing a velvet box. Inside lay a fortune in diamonds. The necklace was delicate but unmistakably expensive, designed to draw the eye to exactly where Lorenzo wanted attention. Arya stood still as they fastened it around her throat, the cold stones settling against her skin like shackles made of light. When it was done, she looked at herself again and barely recognized the woman in the mirror. This wasn't her. This was a character she was playing, Lorenzo's wife, criminal's consort, a woman who belonged in this world of violence and luxury. "Perfect," the stylist declared. Mr. Vieri will be very pleased. Arya said nothing. What was there to say? The team packed up and departed, leaving her alone with her reflection and the weight of what was coming. She had 2 hours before Lorenzo returned, 2 hours to prepare herself mentally for the performance ahead. She spent them pacing the penthouse in her gown, practicing neutral expressions in mirrors, rehearsing responses to potential questions. Who was she? Lorenzo's wife. How did they meet? Through family connections. How was married life? Wonderful. Thank you for asking. Lies built on lies, all of it designed to obscure the truth. She was a prisoner playing dress-up in her cage. The elevator chimed at 6:30, and Lorenzo stepped into the penthouse looking like he'd walked out of a fashion magazine. His tuxedo was cut with the same precision as everything else in his life. Perfect fit, perfect lines, the bow tie precisely centered. His dark hair was swept back, and for a moment Arya understood why people feared him. He looked like power incarnate, a man who could destroy you with a word or a glance. His eyes found her across the room, and he stopped. You look... He seemed to search for words, something Arya hadn't seen him do before. Stunning. That was the goal, wasn't it? She turned slowly, letting him see the full effect of his money and planning. To make sure I look like I belong on your arm. Lorenzo crossed the distance between them, his movements controlled and deliberate. When he reached her, he extended a small box. I have something else for you. Arya opened it to find earrings that matched the necklace. More diamonds, more wealth casually displayed. She put them on without comment, her hands steady despite the anger simmering beneath her composure. There's one more thing, Lorenzo said quietly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a ring. Not the wedding band already on her finger, but something else. An engagement ring with a stone so large it seemed obscene. You're joking. People will expect to see one. He took her left hand, his touch gentle but firm. It completes the picture. Arya wanted to rip her hand away, to throw the ring in his face and tell him exactly what he could do with his picture. But they were past the point of resistance. She'd agreed to play this role, and that meant accepting all the trappings that came with it. Lorenzo slid the ring onto her finger, and the weight of it joined the necklace and earrings. A fortune in chains, each piece a reminder of exactly who owned her. Perfect, he murmured, and there was something in his voice that made her look up sharply. For just a moment, his mask slipped. Arya saw something beneath the cold control. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, as if he was seeing her as more than just an asset or a problem to be managed. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual unreadable expression. The car is waiting, he said, offering his arm. Arya took it because she had no choice, her hand settling into the crook of his elbow with practiced ease. They rode the elevator down in silence, Lorenzo's presence beside her like a storm holding its breath. Marco was waiting with a different car this time, a sleek black Bentley that screamed wealth and power. Lorenzo handed her in with old-fashioned courtesy, then settled beside her as Marco pulled into traffic. Remember, Lorenzo said quietly as they drove, these people are predators. They'll smile and make pleasant conversation, but they're always looking for weakness, for leverage. Sounds like your kind of people. His mouth twitched. They are. Which is why you need to be careful. Don't drink too much. Don't share personal information. Don't let anyone separate you from me. Worried someone will steal your property? Lorenzo's hand found hers on the seat between them, his fingers closing around hers with enough pressure to make his point without causing pain. Worried someone will hurt you to hurt me. You're not property, Arya. You're a vulnerability I didn't have a week ago. That makes you a target. The honesty in his words surprised her. Then maybe you should have thought of that before forcing me into this. Probably. He didn't release her hand. But it's too late now. We're in this together, whether either of us likes it. Arya looked down at their joined hands, hers trapped in his, both of them wearing rings that symbolized a union neither had wanted. I hate you, she said quietly. I know. I will never forgive you for this. I know that too. Then why? Because despite all of that, I need you to survive tonight. Lorenzo's grip tightened fractionally. These people will use any perceived weakness against us, against me. If they think you're unhappy, they'll exploit it. If they sense discord, they'll weaponize it. So I'm asking you, not as your captor, not as the man who forced you into this marriage, but as someone who is genuinely trying to keep you alive, please play your role tonight. The please caught her off guard. Lorenzo didn't strike her as a man who asked for anything, who said please or acknowledged need. The fact that he was doing so now told her more about the danger they were walking into than any direct warning could have. I'll play my role, Arya said finally. But not for you, for myself. Because I'm not going to let your enemies think I'm weak. Something that might have been respect flickered across Lorenzo's features. Fair enough. The Bentley pulled up to a hotel that defined opulence, all marble and gold, with a red carpet leading to the entrance where cameras flashed and reporters called out questions. Arya's stomach clenched at the sight of so many people, so many watching eyes. Ready? Lorenzo asked. No, she would never be ready for this, but she nodded anyway. Marco opened the door, and Lorenzo stepped out first, turning to offer his hand. Arya took it and emerged into a storm of camera flashes and shouted questions that blurred together into white noise. Lorenzo's arm came around her waist, holding her steady against the onslaught, and they moved up the red carpet together. Mr. Vieri, over here! Who's your beautiful companion? Is it true you two just got married? Lorenzo stopped and turned toward the cameras with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. His smile was practiced, charming without being warm. Gentlemen, ladies, allow me to introduce my wife, Arya Vieri. The cameras went wild. Arya forced herself to smile, to lean into Lorenzo like she belonged there, to play the role of a woman blissfully in love rather than desperately trapped. How did you meet? Someone called out. Through family, Lorenzo answered smoothly. I knew immediately she was special. What do you think of your husband's business dealings, Mrs. Vieri? The question was a trap, and Arya recognized it instantly. I think my husband is brilliant at everything he does, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm very proud to stand beside him. More questions, more cameras, but Lorenzo was already guiding her forward with gentle pressure on her waist. They entered the hotel's grand ballroom, and the assault of noise and light shifted to something more refined. Crystal chandeliers, live orchestra, hundreds of people in evening wear mingling with champagne and calculated smiles. This was Lorenzo's world, and for tonight, it was hers too. You did well out there, Lorenzo murmured as a waiter approached with champagne. He took 2 glasses, handing her one. I told you I understood the assignment. Arya sipped the champagne, letting the bubbles settle her nerves. Around them, people were beginning to notice their arrival, conversations pausing as eyes tracked their movement. Lorenzo! A man approached, silver-haired, expensively dressed, radiating the kind of confidence that came from old money and older corruption. I heard rumors you'd married, but I didn't believe them until now. Robert. Lorenzo shook his hand with practiced warmth. Allow me to introduce my wife, Arya. Robert turned his assessing gaze on her, and Arya felt the weight of it like a physical thing. Enchanted, he said, taking her hand and kissing it with old-world courtesy that felt invasive. Lorenzo, you've done well for yourself. I know. And how are you finding married life, my dear? Robert asked, still holding her hand a beat too long. It's everything I hoped it would be, Arya said, retrieving her hand with a smile that hurt her face. I'm sure it is. Something sly entered Robert's expression. Though I must say, Lorenzo, I'm surprised you settled down. You were always so committed to your independence. Circumstances change, Lorenzo said smoothly, and some opportunities are too valuable to ignore. The way he said it, like she was a business acquisition, made Arya's grip tighten on her champagne flute. But she kept smiling, kept playing the role, because dozens of eyes were watching this interaction and judging every micro-expression. Robert laughed. Well, I hope you'll both attend my summer party next month. I'd love to get to know your lovely wife better. We'll see what our schedule allows, Lorenzo said, which Arya recognized as a polite dismissal. Robert drifted away, and Lorenzo's hand settled on her lower back again, warm through the thin fabric of her gown. That, he said quietly, was a test. What kind of test? Robert runs one of the largest money laundering operations on the eastern seaboard. He's also been looking for leverage against me for the past 3 years. Lorenzo guided her toward a quieter corner of the ballroom. Every word of that conversation will be analyzed and reported to people who want to see me fail. And did I pass? With flying colors. Something that might have been pride flickered in his expression. "You're a natural at this." Arya didn't know whether to be insulted or flattered. Before she could decide, another couple approached, then another, each one bringing their own brand of veiled hostility and calculating interest. Lorenzo handled them all with practiced ease, introducing Arya, deflecting personal questions, maintaining the image of a powerful man secure in his new marriage. And Arya played her role. She smiled and made small talk and pretended to be exactly who they thought she was. Lorenzo Vieri's chosen bride, a woman content in her gilded cage. But beneath the performance, she was watching, learning, understanding. These people were exactly what Lorenzo had said. Predators disguised in evening wear, always searching for weakness, for angles, for ways to advance their own interests. They reminded her of her father, actually. The same casual ruthlessness, the same ability to smile while calculating how to destroy you. The dinner was announced, and Lorenzo led her to their table, positioned prominently near the front, of course, positioned Yabasa. They were seated with other couples, all of them involved in Lorenzo's world in one way or another. The conversation flowed around topics both mundane and coded, surface pleasantries hiding darker business discussions. Arya picked at her food and sipped her champagne sparingly, heeding Lorenzo's earlier warning. Across the table, a woman named Gabriella, wife of one of Lorenzo's associates, studied her with barely concealed curiosity. "So tell us, Arya," Gabriella said during a lull in conversation, "how does it feel to marry into such an influential family?" The pause before influential was deliberate. Arya heard the real question underneath. How does it feel to marry a criminal? "I feel very fortunate," Arya said carefully. "Lorenzo has been nothing but generous." "I'm sure he has." Gabriella's smile was sharp. "Though I imagine it must be quite an adjustment. What did you do before the wedding?" Another trap. Anything Arya said could be used to assess her background, her connections, her potential value or vulnerability. "I was in school," she said, which was technically true. "But I've put that on hold for now." "How devoted?" Gabriella turned to Lorenzo. "You must be very proud to have found someone so willing to sacrifice for you." Lorenzo's hand found Arya's under the table, his fingers threading through hers. To anyone watching, it looked affectionate. But Arya felt the tension in his grip, the warning. "I'm the fortunate one," he said smoothly. Arya could have had anyone. The fact that she chose me is something I don't take lightly. The lie was delivered with such sincerity that Arya almost believed it herself. Almost. Gabriella's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing more, turning her attention back to her meal. Lorenzo's thumb stroked across Arya's knuckles once. Reassurance or warning, she wasn't sure which. The dinner continued, course after elaborate course, each one accompanied by more wine and more coded conversations. Arya felt like she was navigating a minefield blindfolded, every word a potential disaster waiting to happen. When dinner finally ended and the dancing began, Lorenzo stood and offered his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request. Arya let him lead her onto the floor where other couples were already swaying to the orchestra's rendition of something classical and romantic. Lorenzo's arm came around her waist, pulling her closer than strictly necessary, his other hand capturing hers. "You're doing remarkably well," he murmured as they began to move. "Better than I expected." "You thought I'd crack?" "I thought you'd try." His hand pressed against her lower back, guiding her through the steps with practiced ease. "But you're stronger than you look." "You don't know anything about me." "I'm learning." Lorenzo's dark eyes held hers, and for a moment Arya forgot to breathe. This close, she could see the individual flecks of color in his irises, could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtly dangerous. "You're adaptable, intelligent, brave enough to be terrified and still function." "I'm not brave, I'm trapped." "Those things aren't mutually exclusive." He spun her expertly, and Arya's dress flared around her legs. When he pulled her back in, they were even closer than before. "Most people in your situation would have fallen apart by now, but not you. You're fighting back the only way you can, by learning the rules so you can break them later." The accuracy of his observation made her stumble slightly. Lorenzo caught her easily, his arm tightening around her waist. "I don't know what you're talking about," Arya said. "Yes, you do." His mouth was close to her ear now, his breath warm against her skin. "But here's what you don't understand yet. I'm not your enemy, Arya. I'm the only thing standing between you and people who would use you much more cruelly than I ever could." Is that supposed to make me grateful? It's supposed to make you realistic. The song ended, but Lorenzo didn't release her immediately. They stood there on the dance floor, bodies pressed together, locked in a battle of wills that neither could win. Then someone cleared their throat nearby, and the moment shattered. "Lorenzo, my friend!" A man Arya didn't recognize approached, arms spread in exaggerated welcome. He was younger than most of the crowd, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of sculpted features that suggested either good genetics or expensive surgery. "Marco," Lorenzo said, and something in his tone made Arya's spine stiffen. This was danger. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. Wouldn't miss it." Marco's gaze slid to Arya, lingering in a way that made her skin crawl. "And this must be this bride everyone's talking about, even more beautiful than the rumors suggested." Lorenzo's hand tightened possessively on Arya's waist. "My wife, Arya. Arya, this is Marco Santoro." The name meant nothing to Arya, but the way Lorenzo said it, with careful neutrality that barely masked hostility, told her everything she needed to know. This was an enemy. "Charmed," Marco said, taking her hand before she could stop him. Instead of kissing it, he held it, his thumb stroking across her knuckles in a parody of intimacy. "Tell me, Mrs. Vieri, are you enjoying your introduction to our world?" "Very much," Arya lied, trying to extract her hand. Marco held on. "Marco!" Lorenzo's voice could have frozen flames. "Let go of my wife!" Of course. Marco released her with obvious reluctance. "I meant no disrespect. I'm simply admiring Lorenzo's excellent taste." His smile was all teeth. "Though I have to wonder, does she know what she's gotten herself into?" The ballroom seemed to quiet around them, other guests sensing the tension and turning to watch. Arya felt the weight of dozens of gazes, all of them waiting to see what would happen next. This was a test, a challenge, and however she responded would be reported, analyzed, used as evidence of either strength or weakness. Arya stepped forward, placing herself slightly between Lorenzo and Marco. "I know exactly what I've gotten myself into, Mr. Santoro," she said clearly. "My husband and I have no secrets from each other." It was a complete lie, but delivered with enough conviction that doubt flickered across Marco's face. "Is that so?" He looked past her to Lorenzo. "Then she knows about—" "Enough!" Lorenzo's command cut through the air like a blade. "This isn't the time or place for whatever game you're playing." "No game," Marco said innocently. "Just conversation between old friends." "We were never friends." "No, I suppose not." Marco's smile widened. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Lorenzo. Mrs. Vieri." He nodded to Arya. "I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other." Then he was gone, melting back into the crowd, leaving tension crackling in his wake. Lorenzo's jaw was tight, his entire body radiating barely controlled violence. Arya had never seen him like this. On the edge of losing control, truly dangerous in a way that went beyond his usual calculated menace. "We're leaving," he said quietly. "Lorenzo, now." He guided her through the ballroom with a hand that trembled slightly against her back. Not from fear, Arya realized, but from rage. They collected their coats, made brief excuses to their hosts, and were in the Bentley before Arya fully processed what had happened. Marco drove them away from the hotel, and in the privacy of the car, Lorenzo's careful composure finally cracked. He loosened his bow tie with sharp, angry movements, his breathing uneven. "That was a mistake," he said, more to himself than to her. "I shouldn't have brought you, shouldn't have exposed you to—" "Who was that?" Arya interrupted. Lorenzo looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something other than control in his eyes. She saw fury, and beneath it, worry. "Marco Santoro, Min," he said finally. "He used to work for me. Now he works for my enemies." "And what did he mean about me knowing what I've gotten into?" Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the window. When he finally spoke, his voice was tired in a way Arya had never heard before. "He meant that being married to me makes you a target, that every enemy I have will now see you as leverage, as a weakness they can exploit." He turned back to her. "He meant that I've put you in danger just by tying you to my name." Arya processed this, her earlier anger shifting into something more complicated. "You knew this would happen." "Yes. And you did it anyway. I had my reasons." "What reasons could possibly be worth—" "To protect you!" The words exploded from Lorenzo with startling force. "Your father's debts put a target on your back. If I hadn't married you, his enemies would have used you to get to him. At least this way. Under my protection, there are rules. Lines that can't be crossed. Arya stared at him, trying to reconcile this new information with everything she'd believed. You're saying you married me to save me? I'm saying I married you because it served multiple purposes. Eliminating your father's debt was one. Securing a valuable connection was another. But yes, keeping you safe from people far worse than me was part of the calculation. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications Arya wasn't ready to examine. Lorenzo had forced her into this marriage, had trapped her in his world, had stolen her freedom, but he'd also, in his own twisted way, been trying to protect her. It didn't make it right, didn't forgive the violation of her autonomy, but it complicated the simple narrative of captor and victim that Arya had been clinging to. I don't know what to do with that, she said finally. You don't have to do anything with it. Lorenzo's mask was sliding back into place, control reasserting itself. Just be more careful. Marco showing up tonight wasn't coincidence. He wanted to see you, to assess whether you're truly valuable to me or just a convenient acquisition. And what did he conclude? Lorenzo's gaze settled on her with uncomfortable intensity, that you're far more valuable than anyone anticipated. The words should have felt like a compliment. Instead, they felt like a death sentence, because value, in Lorenzo's world, made you a target. They rode the rest of the way in silence, and when they finally reached the penthouse, Arya went straight to her room without a word. She stripped off the expensive gown, the diamonds, the rings, all the trappings of her performance, and stood under a scalding shower until her skin turned red. But she couldn't wash away the truth. She was in deeper than she'd realized, tangled in a web of violence and power that extended far beyond her understanding. And the most terrifying part? She was starting to see why Lorenzo operated the way he did. In a world of predators, compassion was weakness. Mercy was suicide. The only way to survive was to be harder, colder, more ruthless than everyone else. It was a lesson Arya had never wanted to learn, but she was learning it anyway. When Arya woke the next morning, the penthouse was silent in a way that felt deliberate. She lay in bed listening for any sign of Lorenzo's presence, but heard nothing. Either he was gone or he was being very quiet, and both possibilities unsettled her in different ways. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like a film she couldn't stop watching. Marco Santoro's predatory smile, the weight of dozens of calculating gazes. Lorenzo's hand trembling with barely controlled rage against her back, and his admission in the car that marrying her had been, in part, about protection. Arya didn't know what to do with that information. It didn't change the fundamental truth that he'd stolen her choice, her freedom, her life, but it added layers she hadn't expected, complications that made simple hatred more difficult to maintain. She dressed in jeans and a sweater, armor of normalcy against the strangeness of her new existence. When she emerged from her room, she found Lorenzo in the kitchen making coffee. He was already dressed for business in dark slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows in a way that should have looked casual but somehow didn't. He glanced up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "Good morning. Is it?" Arya moved to the coffee pot, pouring herself a cup just to have something to do with her hands. "That depends on your perspective." Lorenzo leaned against the counter, studying her. "How are you feeling about last night?" "Which part? The performance, the threats, or the revelation that I'm now a target for your enemies?" "All of it." Arya took a long drink of coffee, using the time to organize her thoughts. "I think," she said finally, "that you've dragged me into a war I don't understand and given me no weapons to fight with." "What weapons do you want?" The question surprised her. "Information. I can't navigate this world blind." Lorenzo was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes assessing. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. Who your enemies are, what they want, why Marco Santoro looked at me like I was a prize he intended to claim." Arya set her cup down with deliberate care. "You said last night that you married me partly to protect me. From what exactly?" "From men like your father's creditors. From organizations that would have used you as leverage to force payment or cooperation." He paused. "And from people in my own world who would have seen you as an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" "To hurt me." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "I've spent 15 years building my empire, making calculated decisions, maintaining control. I've never had a weakness someone could exploit." Until now. So I'm a liability. You're a complication. He moved closer, stopping just inside her personal space. But complications can be managed if everyone involved understands the reality of the situation. And what's the reality? That we're bound together now, whether we like it or not. Your survival depends on mine, and increasingly, mine depends on yours. If you're taken or harmed, it weakens my position, makes me look vulnerable, gives my enemies leverage they've never had before. Arya processed this, her mind working through implications, which means keeping me safe is in your best interest. Exactly. But it also means I have power over you that I didn't have before. Lorenzo's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. I was wondering when you'd realize that. The admission hung between them, heavy with possibility. Arya had been thinking of herself as powerless, as a prisoner with no agency. But if what Lorenzo said was true, her mere existence as his wife gave her influence she hadn't recognized. What happens if I refuse to cooperate? She asked. If I publicly denounce you, or run to the authorities, or then you destroy both of us. Lorenzo's voice was calm but absolute. I would be humiliated, weakened. My enemies would move immediately to capitalize on the discord. And you... He stopped, something dark crossing his features. You would be marked as a traitor to my organization. The protection my name offers would evaporate, and the people who want to hurt me would have free rein to use you however they saw fit. The threat was delivered without malice, just cold fact. Arya felt the trap close around her with new clarity. She wasn't just Lorenzo's prisoner, she was his hostage to fortune, and he was hers. They were locked together in a mutual destruction pact, each capable of ruining the other. So we're stuck, she said. We're interdependent. Lorenzo's hand came up, his fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected gentleness. There's a difference. Arya jerked away from the touch, her pulse jumping. Don't. Don't what? Don't touch me like that? Like this is something other than what it is. And what is it? A transaction, a strategic alliance. Whatever you want to call it, but not a real marriage. Lorenzo's hand dropped. You're right, it's not a real marriage. But it needs to look like one, which means occasional moments of physical affection. You'll have to get used to that. I don't have to get used to anything. Actually, you do. His tone shifted, hardening. Last night was your introduction to my world. There will be more events, more gatherings, more opportunities for people to assess our relationship and look for cracks. If you flinch every time I touch you, they'll notice. They'll exploit it. Arya wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The performance they'd started at the gala would have to continue indefinitely. Every public appearance, every interaction with his associates, every moment they spent in view of others would require her to pretend affection she didn't feel. The thought made her want to scream. Fine, she said tightly. I'll play the devoted wife in public, but in private, you keep your distance. Agreed. Lorenzo moved back to his coffee, the moment of tension dissipating. I have meetings most of today, but I'd like you to stay in the penthouse. Why? Because Marco's appearance last night changes things. I need to reassess security, determine what he knows and what he's planning. Lorenzo's expression was grim. Until I have better intelligence, I want you where I know you're protected. So I'm a prisoner again. You're being cautious. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. Lorenzo set his cup down with a sound like a gavel striking. Arya, I understand your frustration. I do. But you need to trust that I know what I'm doing. Marco Santoro is dangerous in ways you can't imagine. If he's decided you're valuable, then keeping you visible and vulnerable would be catastrophic. You mean it would be catastrophic for you? I mean it would be catastrophic for both of us. He grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair, shrugging into it with sharp, angry movements. But if you'd rather test that theory, by all means, walk out that door and see how long it takes before one of Marco's people picks you up. The challenge in his voice made Arya's hands clench. She wanted to call his bluff, to prove he was exaggerating the danger. But the memory of Marco's predatory gaze stopped her. There had been something in the way he'd looked at her, calculation mixed with anticipation, that suggested Lorenzo wasn't overstating the threat. How long? She asked instead. How long what? How long do I have to stay locked up? Lorenzo's expression softened fractionally. A few days? Maybe a week? just until I understand what Marco's planning and can adjust security accordingly. A week. 7 more days of this suffocating isolation, of pacing the penthouse like a caged animal. Arya felt the walls closing in already. "I want something in return," she said. Lorenzo paused at the door. "What?" "Access to your office, to your files. If I'm stuck here, at least let me understand the business I'm supposedly part of." For a long moment, Lorenzo just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, to Arya's surprise, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. "The file cabinets are locked," he said, crossing back to her and pressing the key into her palm. "The computer requires a password. It's written on a card in the top drawer. Don't access anything marked with a red flag in the file system. Those are operational details you're better off not knowing." Arya stared at the key, shocked. "You're just giving this to me?" "You asked for information. I'm providing it." Lorenzo's fingers closed around hers, the key trapped between their palms. "But understand something, Arya. What you learn in that office, what you see in those files, you can't unknow. Some of it will be ugly. Some of it will be worse than ugly. And once you have that knowledge, you become complicit in it. I'm already complicit just by being married to you. Not in the same way." His grip tightened. Reading about violence in a file is different from witnessing it. Knowing about crimes is different from understanding their details. "Are you sure you want that burden?" Arya met his gaze without flinching. "Yes." Lorenzo studied her for another moment, then released her hand. "All right. But when you find something that horrifies you, and you will, remember that you asked for this." Then he was gone, the elevator doors closing behind him with a finality that left Arya alone with the key burning in her palm and the weight of his warning settling on her shoulders. She stood there for a long time, staring at the key. This was what she'd wanted: access, information, understanding, but Lorenzo's words echoed in her mind. Once you have that knowledge, you become complicit in it. Was that true? Did knowing about crimes make her guilty of them? Or was ignorance its own form of complicity, a willful blindness that allowed evil to flourish? Arya didn't have answers, but she had a key, and curiosity burning in her chest like acid. She made herself eat breakfast first, a deliberate delay to prove she wasn't desperate. Then she cleaned the kitchen with meticulous care, every movement controlled and purposeful. Only when she'd exhausted every reasonable excuse did she finally approach Lorenzo's office door. It was still locked. She tried the handle just to be sure, then used the key Lorenzo had given her. The lock clicked, and the door swung open to reveal a space that was somehow both exactly what she'd expected and completely surprising. The office was masculine and austere. Dark wood furniture, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes in multiple languages. But it was also clearly lived in, with papers scattered across the desk, coffee rings on the wood, a jacket thrown over one chair. This was where Lorenzo actually worked, not just a showpiece for visitors. Arya moved to the desk first, her fingers trailing over documents that probably cost lives or fortunes or both. Most were in Italian, which she couldn't read, but some were in English: contracts, shipping manifests, financial statements for businesses she didn't recognize. The computer sat dark and silent. Arya opened the top drawers Lorenzo had instructed and found the password card tucked beneath a leather-bound notebook. The password was a string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to her, but she typed it carefully and watched the screen come to life. The desktop was organized with the same precision as everything else in Lorenzo's life. Folders labeled by month and year, documents sorted by category, nothing left to chance or chaos. Arya clicked on the most recent month, holding her breath. Inside were spreadsheets tracking shipments, destinations, contents, payments. Some were obviously legitimate: restaurant supplies, construction materials, imported wines. But others had codes instead of descriptions, amounts that seemed too large for legal goods, destinations in countries she associated with instability and conflict. Weapons, she realized with growing certainty. These were weapons shipments. Arya's hands trembled on the mouse as she opened another folder. This one contained photographs, surveillance images of people she didn't recognize, some circled in red, others crossed out entirely. The crossed out ones had dates next to them, and Arya's stomach turned as she understood what those dates meant. Deaths, executions, eliminations. Lorenzo had warned her, had told her explicitly that what she found would horrify her. But seeing it laid out so clinically, so methodically, made it real in a way his warnings hadn't. She was married to a man who ordered deaths the way other people ordered coffee. Arya closed the folder with shaking fingers and sat back in Lorenzo's chair, trying to process what she'd seen. Part of her wanted to stop, to close the computer and pretend she'd never looked. But a larger part, the part that had demanded this access in the first place, needed to understand the full scope of what she'd been pulled into. She opened the file cabinets next, using the key to unlock drawer after drawer of meticulously organized records. Financial statements showing money flowing through shell corporations and offshore accounts. Legal documents for properties she suspected were fronts. Contracts with legitimate businesses that probably had no idea they were dealing with a criminal enterprise. And then, in the bottom drawer of the last cabinet, she found something that made her blood run cold. A file with her father's name on it. Arya's hands shook as she pulled it out and flipped it open. Inside were financial records documenting Marcus Vallen's debts, hundreds of thousands of dollars borrowed over the course of 3 years, each loan carrying interest rates that guaranteed he'd never pay them off. There were surveillance photos of her father at casinos, at racetracks, at private poker games where the stakes climbed into 6 figures. And there, near the back of the file, was a proposal. Asset acquisition in lieu of debt payment, Arya Vallen, daughter. Value assessment, moderate financial, high strategic. Recommendation, marriage contract to secure asset and eliminate debt simultaneously. Arya read it 3 times, each time hoping she'd misunderstood. But the words didn't change. Lorenzo hadn't just accepted her as payment for her father's debts. He'd suggested it, had assessed her value like she was property to be acquired, had calculated exactly how much she was worth as a strategic asset. Everything he'd told her about protection, about keeping her safe from worse alternatives, had been a lie, or at least a convenient reframing of the truth. He'd wanted her. Not because she was special, not because he'd been struck by her at first sight, but because she represented value in his endless calculations of profit and loss. The door to the office opened behind her. Arya spun around to find Lorenzo standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he took in the open file cabinet. The documents spread across his desk, the folder with her father's name still clutched in her hands. "You weren't supposed to be back for hours," she said, her voice shaking. "I forgot some documents." Lorenzo's gaze moved from her face to the folder. "I see you've been thorough in your research. You assessed me." The words came out harsh, accusatory. "Like I was a car you were considering buying." "Yes." The simple admission was somehow worse than a denial would have been. Arya stood, the folder falling from her numb fingers to scatter papers across the floor. "You told me you married me to protect me, that it was about keeping me safe from people worse than you. That was part of it, but not the main part. The main part was that I had strategic value." Arya's voice was rising, but she couldn't control it. "You looked at me and saw an opportunity to expand your influence, to secure whatever connection my father had that you wanted." Lorenzo stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with deliberate care. "Your father had relationships with several shipping companies I needed access to. Marrying you gave me leverage with him and, by extension, with them. Yes, that was a factor in my decision." A factor? It was the entire reason. "No." Lorenzo moved closer, and Arya retreated until her back hit the desk. "The entire reason was that your father owed me a debt he couldn't pay, and I needed collateral that ensured his continued cooperation. You were that collateral. But once I met you, once I understood who you were beyond a name on a balance sheet, the calculation changed. I don't believe you. I don't care if you believe me or not. It's the truth." Lorenzo braced his hands on the desk on either side of her, caging her in. "You want honesty? Fine, yes, I assessed you. Yes, I calculated your value. That's what I do. I evaluate assets and determine how they can serve my interests. But what I found when I actually met you was someone far more valuable than any business connection." "What does that mean?" "It means you're intelligent, adaptable, stronger than you realize. It means that in the weeks since I married you, you've proven yourself capable of navigating a world that destroys most people who enter it." His voice dropped lower, more intense. "It means that if I'd known then what I know now, I would have married you even without the strategic considerations." Arya's breath caught. Lorenzo was close enough that she could see the individual stubble on his jaw, could smell the faint scent of his cologne mixed with something darker, coffee and ink and power. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I've never lied to you, Arya. I've withheld information, I've framed truths in ways that served my purposes, but I've never directly lied." Lorenzo's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. "If I wanted to lie, I would tell you that marrying you was purely altruistic, that I saw a woman in danger and rushed to save her. But that's not who I am, and you deserve better than comfortable fictions." "I don't want this," Arya whispered. "Want what?" "This confusion, these complications. It was easier when I could just hate you." "I know." Lorenzo's forehead rested against hers, and Arya's eyes fell closed despite herself. "But easy isn't always honest, and you asked for honesty." They stood like that for a moment that stretched too long, breathing the same air, existing in a space where captor and captive blurred into something neither of them could name. Then Arya's phone, the one Lorenzo had given her, buzzed violently in her pocket. They both jerked apart. Arya fumbled for the phone, her hand still shaking, and saw a number she didn't recognize. Before she could decide whether to answer, Lorenzo took it from her and checked the screen. His expression went from neutral to dangerous in a heartbeat. "What?" Arya asked. "Who is it?" Instead of answering, Lorenzo answered the call and put it on speaker. "This is Vieri." "Lorenzo!" The voice on the other end was male, cheerful, and somehow menacing in its pleasantness. "I was hoping to speak with your lovely wife, actually. Is she available?" Arya's blood turned to ice. She recognized that voice from the gala. Marco Santoro. Lorenzo's jaw clenched. "How did you get this number?" "I have my sources, but that's not important right now. What's important is that Arya and I have a conversation, woman to woman, so to speak." A pause. "Or should I say, asset to asset? Whatever you want to say to my wife, you can say to me." "I don't think so." Marco's voice hardened. "Put her on, Lorenzo, or I start making calls to people who would be very interested in knowing about the discrepancies in your latest shipping manifests." Arya watched Lorenzo's face as he calculated the threat, weighed his options, made his decision. Then, with visible reluctance, he handed her the phone and mouthed one word. "Careful." Arya took the device with trembling hands. "This is Arya." "There she is!" Marco's warmth returned, artificial and cloying. "I wanted to reach out personally and apologize for making you uncomfortable at the gala. That wasn't my intention." "What was your intention?" "Merely to introduce myself. You see, Arya, I think you and I have something in common." "I doubt that." "We're both trapped in Lorenzo's world, both trying to navigate a maze he built and controls. The difference is, I found a way out, and I thought you might be interested in learning how." Arya's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Lorenzo, saw the dangerous stillness in his posture, the warning in his eyes. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," she said. "Not selling, offering. There's a difference." Marco's voice dropped to something like concern. "Has Lorenzo told you what happens to people who displease him? Has he explained the consequences of failure in his organization?" "He's told me enough." "Has he told you about the warehouse on Pier 9, about what happens there when someone needs to be taught a lesson?" Marco paused. "Has he told you how many bodies have been pulled out of the river with his signature on them?" Arya's gaze stayed locked on Lorenzo's face, watching for any sign that Marco was lying. But Lorenzo's expression confirmed everything, not with guilt, but with grim acceptance of truths he'd never tried to hide. "Why are you telling me this?" Arya asked. "Because you deserve to know who you're shackled to. Because Lorenzo has convinced you that he's your protector, when really, he's your greatest threat." Marco's voice turned silky. "And because I'm offering you a choice he never gave you, the chance to walk away. Come work for me instead. I'll pay off whatever leverage he has over you, get you out of the city, set you up somewhere safe. All you have to do is say yes." The offer hung in the air like poison. Arya could feel Lorenzo's tension radiating across the small space between them, could see the calculation behind his eyes as he waited to see what she would do. This was a test, not from Lorenzo this time, but from Marco. A test to see if she was truly loyal to her husband, or if she could be turned. And the horrible thing was, part of her wanted to say yes, wanted to take the escape route Marco was offering, to run as far and fast as she could from Lorenzo and his world of violence and moral compromise. But another part, a part that frightened her with its certainty, knew that Marco's offer was a trap, that working for Lorenzo's enemy would make her a traitor, would paint a target on her back that no amount of distance could erase, and that whatever Lorenzo was, whatever he'd done, at least his threats had been honest. "No," Arya said clearly. "I'm not interested." "Are you sure?" "Because this offer has an expiration date, Arya. Once I hang up this phone, it's gone. And you'll be left with Lorenzo and all his terrible truths." "I'm sure." Silence on the other end, stretching long enough that Arya wondered if he'd hung up. Then, "Pity. You would have been valuable to me, but Lorenzo always did have a gift for inspiring misplaced loyalty." The warmth in Marco's voice vanished entirely. "Give my regards to your husband. Tell him I'll be seeing him soon." The line went dead. Arya lowered the phone slowly, her entire body shaking with adrenaline. Lorenzo took the device from her nerveless fingers and set it aside, his movements controlled despite the fury she could see building behind his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked. "No." Arya's laugh was sharp and broken. "Nothing about this is all right." "You did well." "Did I?" "Because I just had a crime lord offer to rescue me from my crime lord husband, and the fact that I said no feels insane." Lorenzo's hand settled on her shoulders, steady and warm. "It wasn't insane. It was smart. Marco doesn't rescue people, Arya. He collects them. If you'd said yes, you would have traded one cage for another, and his would have been much less comfortable than mine. How do you know? Maybe he was genuinely trying to help." "Because I know Marco. I trained him, taught him everything he knows about this business. And the most important lesson he learned was that compassion is weakness." Lorenzo's grip tightened fractionally. "He doesn't want to help you. He wants to hurt me. And the best way to do that is through you." The certainty in his voice made Arya's remaining doubts crumble. "What happens now?" "Now we prepare for war." Lorenzo released her and moved to his desk, already pulling out his phone. "Marco calling you directly was a declaration. He's not hiding his interest anymore, which means he's confident enough in his position to make a move." "What kind of move?" "That's what I need to find out." Lorenzo's fingers flew across his phone screen, sending rapid messages to people Arya couldn't see. "I'm calling in my security team. From now on, you don't leave this penthouse without a minimum of 4 guards. You don't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. And you don't, under any circumstances, go anywhere alone. So I'm a prisoner again." Lorenzo looked up, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "You're protected. There's a difference. You keep saying that, but from where I'm standing, it feels the same." "I know." He crossed back to her, his hands framing her face with surprising tenderness. "I know this isn't the life you wanted. I know I've taken choices from you that you should have had the right to make, but I need you to trust me on this. Marco Santoro is dangerous in ways you can't imagine. And if he's decided you're a weakness he can exploit, then keeping you safe becomes my only priority." Arya wanted to argue, to fight against the suffocating protectiveness in his voice, but the memory of Marco's cold calculation, the way he'd assessed her value with the same detachment Lorenzo might use for a business asset, made her hesitate. "For how long?" she asked instead. "Until Marco makes his move and I can counter it. Could be days, could be weeks." "I can't live like this for weeks, Lorenzo. I'll lose my mind." "Then help me end it faster." Lorenzo's thumbs stroked along her cheekbones, the gesture almost hypnotic. "You're smart, observant. You see things other people miss. Use that. Help me understand what Marco's planning so we can stop it before it starts." It was a strange kind of partnership he was offering, prisoner and warden working together against a common enemy, but it was also more agency than Arya had been given since this nightmare began. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Lorenzo smiled then, and it transformed his face into something almost beautiful. "Exactly what you've been doing. Learn, observe, ask questions. And when the time comes—" He paused, something dark flickering in his eyes. "When the time comes, I need you to be ready to make hard choices." "What kind of choices?" "The kind that will change who you are." Lorenzo's hands dropped from her face. Marco was right about one thing. This world has consequences. And the deeper you go, the harder it becomes to leave with your soul intact. Arya heard the warning beneath his words, the unspoken truth that she was standing at a precipice. On one side was the illusion of innocence, the belief that she could remain untouched by Lorenzo's darkness. On the other was complicity, participation, the transformation from victim to something else entirely. "I'm already changed," she said quietly. "The moment you forced me into this marriage, I stopped being who I was before." Changed, yes, but not yet transformed. Lorenzo's gaze held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "That comes later. When you're faced with the choice between your principles and your survival, and you choose survival, how do you know I will? Because everyone does, eventually. That's what this world teaches you, that survival trumps morality every single time." Arya wanted to deny it, to insist she would never compromise her values no matter the cost. But the truth was, she'd already started making those calculations. When she'd rejected Marco's offer, it hadn't been because staying with Lorenzo was morally right. It had been because running to Marco felt more dangerous. She was learning to think like Lorenzo, to weigh options in terms of survival rather than ethics, and that realization terrified her more than anything else. "I need time to process this," she said, stepping back from him. "All of it. The files, Marco's call, what you're asking me to become." Lorenzo nodded. "Take whatever time you need." But Arya, he waited until she looked at him. "Don't take too long. Marco won't wait for you to be ready. He'll move when it serves him, and when he does, I need to know you're with me." "With you," Arya repeated. "Not controlled by you, not owned by you. With you." Yes. It was the closest thing to an equal partnership Lorenzo had ever offered. And despite everything, despite the coercion and the lies and the violence, Arya found herself wanting to believe it was possible. She left him in his office and returned to her room, closing the door and leaning against it like it could protect her from the chaos swirling around her. Through the walls, she could hear Lorenzo making calls, his voice sharp with command as he mobilized whatever forces he controlled. Arya moved to the window and looked out at the city spread below like a glittering trap. Somewhere out there, Marco Santoro was planning his next move. And somewhere in this penthouse, Lorenzo Vieri was planning his countermove. And she, Arya Valen, who'd once dreamed of a normal life with normal problems, was caught between them, being pulled deeper into a world she'd never asked to enter. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "The offer stands. When you change your mind, you know how to reach me." Arya deleted it immediately, but the words lingered in her mind like a virus. "When you change your mind, not if, when." As if Marco knew something she didn't. As if he could see a future where Lorenzo's protection failed, and she was left with no choice but to run to the enemy who'd offered her escape. The thought made her skin crawl. But it also made her wonder, what if Marco was right? What if there came a moment when Lorenzo's darkness became too much, when the cost of staying became greater than the risk of running? Arya didn't have an answer, and that uncertainty, that crack in her resolve, felt like the most dangerous thing of all. Because in Lorenzo's world, uncertainty was weakness. And weakness got you killed. She just had to figure out how to be strong enough to survive what was coming, before it was too late. The attack came 3 days later, in the middle of the afternoon, when Arya had finally convinced herself that Marco's threats were just posturing. She was in the kitchen making tea when the power went out. The penthouse plunged into dimness, not complete darkness because of the windows, but enough to make her heart jump into her throat. Through the sudden silence, she heard Lorenzo's voice from his office, sharp and commanding. "Arya, get away from the windows!" She didn't question it, didn't hesitate. Training she didn't know she'd absorbed kicked in, and she dropped the teacup, heard it shatter on the marble floor, and ran toward the interior hallway. Behind her, the massive windows that overlooked the city exploded inward in a cascade of glittering shards. Arya hit the floor as glass rained down, her arms covering her head. The sound was deafening, breaking glass, alarms shrieking to life, and beneath it all, the unmistakable crack of gunfire. Someone was shooting at them. Lorenzo appeared in the hallway, moving low and fast. He grabbed Arya's arm and hauled her to her feet, pulling her toward his office with brutal efficiency. She stumbled after him, her mind struggling to catch up with her body's instinct to survive. "What's happening?" she gasped. "Marco." Lorenzo shoved her into the office and slammed the door behind them. The room was windowless, reinforced, a panic room disguised as a workspace. "He's making his move." More gunfire, closer now. Arya heard shouting. Lorenzo's security team responding, taking up defensive positions. The penthouse had transformed from a gilded cage into a war zone in the space of seconds. Lorenzo moved to a panel hidden behind a bookshelf, pressing his palm against it. The panel slid aside to reveal weapons, more guns than Arya had ever seen in one place, all of them deadly and carefully maintained. "Can you shoot?" Lorenzo asked, pulling out a pistol and checking the magazine with practiced ease. "What? No, I've never—" "Then stay behind me and don't make yourself a target." He handed her a smaller gun anyway, forcing it into her shaking hands. "Safety's here. Point and pull the trigger if anyone comes through that door who isn't one of my men. Can you do that?" Arya stared at the weapon, her entire body trembling. This wasn't supposed to happen. Lorenzo had promised security, had said she was protected. But his protection was failing in real time, and she was holding a gun she didn't know how to use while people with actual training tried to kill them. "Arya." Lorenzo's hand gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Can you do that?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You're stronger than you think." His thumb brushed her cheek, the gesture absurdly gentle given the chaos surrounding them. "I need you to be strong now. Can you do that for me?" Something in his voice, not command but genuine need, cut through her panic. Arya nodded, her fingers tightening around the gun's grip. "Good girl." Lorenzo pressed a quick, hard kiss to her forehead, then moved to the door. "Stay here. Don't open this door for anyone but me." "Wait, where are you going?" "To end this." He checked his own weapon one last time. "I should have dealt with Marco weeks ago. That mistake ends today." Then he was gone, slipping out the door with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this before, many times before. Arya heard his voice joining the others, shouting commands, coordinating defense. The gunfire intensified, and she flinched with every shot, her imagination supplying horrible images of bullets finding flesh, of Lorenzo falling, of being left alone to face whatever came next. She crouched behind the desk, the gun heavy in her hands, and tried to remember how to breathe. Time stopped meaning anything. Seconds stretched into hours while minutes compressed into heartbeats. Arya tracked the battle through sound alone. The staccato rhythm of gunfire, the crash of furniture being overturned for cover, men shouting in Italian and English, words she couldn't decipher through her terror. Then, cutting through it all, a scream. High-pitched and agonized, it ended abruptly in a way that suggested finality. Someone had died. Maybe one of Lorenzo's men. Maybe one of Marco's. Maybe... No. Arya refused to let herself think it might be Lorenzo. He was too controlled, too prepared, too ruthless to fall in his own home. But people died every day doing things they were good at. Being skilled didn't make you invincible. The office door burst open. Arya's finger found the trigger, her hands raising the gun with instinct rather than training. But it was Lorenzo who stood in the doorway, blood spattering his white shirt, his expression carved from stone. "We need to move," he said. "Now." Arya scrambled to her feet. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "Not my blood. Come on." Lorenzo grabbed her free hand and pulled her into the hallway. The penthouse looked like a bomb had gone off. Furniture destroyed, walls pocked with bullet holes, glass everywhere. 3 bodies lay motionless on the floor, their faces turned away. Arya tried not to look, tried not to think about the fact that these had been people minutes ago. Lorenzo's security team was regrouping, weapons trained on the shattered windows in the elevator. One of them, a man Arya recognized as part of her usual detail, had blood seeping through his jacket. He met Lorenzo's eyes and nodded once, some communication passing between them that Arya didn't understand. "Stairwell," Lorenzo commanded. "Marcus, take point. Davidson, rear guard. Everyone else, standard formation." They moved as a unit, Lorenzo keeping Arya at the center of a protective circle. The stairwell door was reinforced steel, and they descended quickly but carefully, weapons sweeping corners, every footfall deliberate and quiet. Arya's mind raced. They were running. Lorenzo Vieri, the man who controlled half the city's criminal operations, was running from an attack on his own territory, which meant Marco's forces were either overwhelming or Lorenzo was trying to avoid a bloodbath. Or both. They emerged into the building's underground garage, and Arya saw more of Lorenzo's men already positioned around a heavily armored SUV. Marco, Lorenzo's driver, not his enemy, had the engine running and the rear door open. "Get in," Lorenzo ordered, practically shoving Arya into the back seat. He slid in beside her as his security team piled into two other vehicles. The convoy pulled out before the doors were fully closed, tires screeching on concrete. "Where are we going?" Arya asked. "Safe house. One Marco doesn't know about." Lorenzo was on his phone, speaking rapid-fire Italian to someone on the other end. His free hand found hers, squeezing tight enough to hurt. "Are you all right?" "I don't know. Am I?" Arya looked down at herself, half expecting to find injuries she hadn't noticed in the adrenaline rush. But her skin was intact, the only blood on her from where she'd grabbed Lorenzo's hand. "What just happened back there?" "An escalation." Lorenzo's jaw was tight, fury radiating from him in waves. "Marco sent a kill team to my home, to our home. That crosses every line in our world. But you expected it. I expected him to move against me, not this directly, not this brazenly." He typed something on his phone, sent it, then finally looked at her. "He's making a statement, showing everyone in the organization that I can't even protect my own territory, my own wife." The raw anger in his voice made Arya flinch. "Your men fought them off. That's not failure. We survived. That's not the same as winning." Lorenzo's hand tightened around hers. "And he'll try again. Probably sooner than I'd like. Marco's committed now. He can't back down without looking weak. And weakness in this world is death." The SUV navigated through city streets with practiced evasion, taking turns that made no logical sense, doubling back, clearly following some pre-planned escape route. Arya watched through tinted windows as her city became unfamiliar territory, neighborhoods she didn't recognize bleeding into industrial districts. "How many people died back there?" she asked quietly. Lorenzo was silent for a moment. "3 of Marco's men. 1 of mine, shot in the initial assault. Another 2 injured, but stable. 4 lives gone in a matter of minutes." Arya felt sick. This was the reality Lorenzo had tried to explain to her, the violence that underpinned his entire world. But knowing it intellectually and experiencing it were completely different things. "The man who died," she said. "Did he have family?" "A wife. 2 kids." Lorenzo's voice was flat, emotionless. "I'll make sure they're taken care of. Compensation, education funds, protection if they need it." "That doesn't bring him back." "No, it doesn't." He turned to look at her fully. "This is what I meant when I said you'd have to make hard choices. That man, his name was Vincent. He knew the risks, accepted them, died protecting what I built and what I claimed as mine, including you." The weight of that settled on Arya's shoulders like a physical thing. A man had died today, at least partially because Lorenzo had married her and made her a target. She was complicit in his death just by existing in this space. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I know." Lorenzo pulled her against his side, his arm coming around her shoulders. The gesture was possessive but also protective, and Arya found herself leaning into it despite everything. "But you're in it now. We both are. And the only way out is through." The safe house turned out to be an unremarkable townhouse in a middle-class neighborhood, the kind of place no one would think to look for Lorenzo Vieri. The security team swept it methodically before allowing them inside, and even then, 2 men stayed outside as sentries. The interior was furnished but impersonal, clearly maintained for exactly this kind of emergency. Lorenzo immediately moved to the windows, checking sightlines and escape routes with the practiced eye of someone who'd survived attempts on his life before. Arya stood in the middle of the living room, still holding the gun he'd given her, and felt reality crash down around her ears. "I need to sit down," she said distantly. Lorenzo was beside her in an instant, taking the weapon from her nerveless fingers and guiding her to the couch. "Put your head between your knees. Breathe slowly." Arya obeyed, the room spinning dangerously. She heard Lorenzo moving around, heard water running, then felt a cold glass pressed into her hand. "Drink," he commanded. She drank, the water shocking her system back to some semblance of normal. When she finally looked up, Lorenzo was crouched in front of her, his blood-spattered shirt discarded, now wearing just a white undershirt that highlighted the muscled tension in his shoulders. "Better?" he asked. "No, but functional." Arya set the glass aside with trembling hands. "How do you live like this? How do you function knowing that any moment someone might try to kill you?" "Practice. And by making sure I'm always the most dangerous person in any room I enter." Lorenzo's hand settled on her knee, warm and steady. But I won't lie to you, Arya. This isn't over. Marco failed today, which means he'll try harder next time. He has to. His reputation demands it. So what do? We hit him first, harder than he hit us. Show everyone who's watching that attacking me has consequences that aren't worth the risk. Lorenzo's expression was grim. I should have done this weeks ago, but I was trying to avoid an all-out war. Now the war's here whether I want it or not. Arya processed this, her mind still struggling to reconcile the man in front of her with the violence he was casually planning. When you say hit him first, you mean, I'm going to destroy everything Marco's built. His businesses, his connections, his reputation. And when he's got nothing left but his life, I'm going to take that too. There was no emotion in Lorenzo's voice, just cold certainty. He threatened you. That's unforgivable. Lorenzo, no. He stood abruptly, pacing the small living room like a caged predator. You don't understand what he did today. The rules in our world, unwritten but absolute, dictate that families are off limits. Wives, children, they're not targets. Marco broke that rule when he sent shooters to our home knowing you were there. But I wasn't hurt. That's not the point. Lorenzo spun to face her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his control cracked completely. The point is he tried. He put you in danger, put a target on your back, made you pick up a weapon and prepare to defend yourself because I couldn't guarantee your safety. The raw emotion in his voice stopped Arya's breath. This wasn't about honor or rules or reputation. This was personal. Lorenzo was genuinely furious that she'd been threatened, that she'd been afraid, that his protection had failed even temporarily. I'm okay, she said quietly. I survived. This time. Lorenzo ran a hand through his hair, the gesture uncharacteristically agitated. What about next time? What about when I'm not there? When my men aren't enough? When Marco finds a weakness I haven't anticipated? Then I'll deal with it. How? You don't know how to fight in this world, Arya. You're smart and brave and stronger than you realize, but that's not enough against people who've spent their entire lives learning how to kill. Arya stood, crossing to where Lorenzo stood, radiating tension. Then teach me. He blinked, pulled from his spiral of rage and worry. What? Teach me. You said I don't know how to fight in your world. Fine. Show me how. Teach me to shoot properly, to defend myself, to see threats before they materialize. She grabbed his shirt, forcing him to look at her. I'm tired of being the liability, Lorenzo. I'm tired of being the thing you have to protect because I'm too weak to protect myself. If I'm going to survive in your world, I need to learn its language. Lorenzo stared at her, something shifting behind his eyes. Then, without warning, he kissed her. It wasn't like the performative kiss at the wedding or the public displays at the gala. This was raw and desperate, his hands fisting in her hair, his mouth claiming hers with an intensity that stole her breath. Arya's hands gripped his shoulders, and for a moment she forgot about the attack, about Marco, about everything except the heat of Lorenzo's body against hers and the way her entire nervous system lit up like fire. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. That, Lorenzo said roughly, was extremely inappropriate given the circumstances. Probably, Arya agreed, her lips tingling. We just survived an assassination attempt. You're in shock. I'm running on adrenaline and rage. This is terrible timing. The worst. And I'm going to kiss you again. This time Arya met him halfway, her arms wrapping around his neck as he lifted her against him. The kiss deepened, became something fierce and claiming, a release of all the tension that had been building between them since the moment they'd met. Arya felt herself responding in ways she'd never expected, her body making decisions her mind hadn't authorized. When they finally broke apart, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. This complicates things, he said. Everything's already complicated. Fair point. His hands settled on her waist, holding her steady. Arya, I need to know, was that shock talking or... I don't know, she interrupted honestly. I don't know what I feel anymore. Fear, anger, attraction. It's all tangled together until I can't tell what's real and what's just survival instinct. Lorenzo's expression softened. That's honest, at least. You said you'd never lied to me. I'm trying to extend the same courtesy. Arya stepped back, putting distance between them before she could make any more decisions she wasn't ready for. But right now we have bigger problems than whatever this is between us. Agreed. Lorenzo's control was sliding back into place, the mask of the calculated crime lord replacing the man who'd kissed her like she was oxygen and he was drowning. Marco will expect me to regroup to fortify my position, which means the last thing he'll anticipate is an immediate counterattack. You're going after him tonight. I'm going after him now. Lorenzo moved to a closet, pulling out weapons and tactical gear that had been pre-positioned. I have people tracking his movements, his safe houses, his known associates. The moment I have a location, I'm moving. Arya watched him prepare for violence with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. And what am I supposed to do? Wait here? Yes, with security outside and instructions to move you again if there's any sign of trouble. Lorenzo checked a gun, holstered it, then turned to face her. I know you want to help, but this is beyond what you're ready for. You don't get to decide what I'm ready for. Actually, I do, because I'm the one who'll have to live with it if you get hurt trying to prove yourself. He crossed to her, his hands framing her face with the same gentleness he'd shown earlier. Let me do this, Arya. Let me protect you the only way I know how. She wanted to argue, to insist she was capable of more than cowering in a safe house. But the truth was, Lorenzo was right. She didn't know how to function in a firefight, didn't know the tactics and strategies that kept people alive in his world. Not yet. When you get back, she said instead, you start training me. No excuses, no delays. You promised to teach me to survive in your world, and I'm holding you to that. Lorenzo's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Deal. He kissed her again, brief and hard, then released her. Stay here. Stay safe. I'll be back before morning. Lorenzo. Arya caught his arm as he turned to leave. Be careful. Marco's proven he's willing to break rules. Don't give him another chance to surprise you. Something warm flickered in his expression. Is that concern I hear, Mrs. Vieri? It's pragmatism. If you die, I'm completely vulnerable. Right, pragmatism. But his eyes said he knew better, that he'd seen the same tangled emotions in her that she'd admitted to feeling. I'll be careful. Then he was gone, and Arya was alone in the safe house with nothing but her thoughts, and the echo of gunfire still ringing in her ears. She moved through the small space restlessly, too wired to sit still. The security team outside was a presence she felt more than saw, shapes moving past windows, voices murmuring into radios. They were Lorenzo's people, loyal to him in ways Arya was only beginning to understand. One of them had died today protecting what Lorenzo claimed as his. Including her. The thought wouldn't leave her alone. Vincent, a man she'd never met, whose face she'd never seen, had taken bullets meant for the people inside Lorenzo's penthouse, had made the calculation that his life was worth less than his employer's interests. Had he known what he was signing up for? Had he understood that marrying some stranger would expand the list of things worth dying for? Arya found herself in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, her eyes wide with residual shock. But beneath that, she saw something else emerging, a hardness that hadn't been there a week ago, a calculation in her gaze that looked disturbingly like Lorenzo's. She was changing, becoming something other than the woman who'd stood at that altar in a dress that felt like a shroud. The question was whether she was becoming stronger or just more damaged. Her phone buzzed. Arya pulled it out, her heart jumping at the thought that it might be Lorenzo with news. But the number was unknown, and the message made her blood run cold. Enjoying the safe house? Lorenzo's predictable. I knew he'd bring you here, but don't worry, I'm not coming for you tonight. I want you to watch him fail first. Then we'll talk about that offer again. Arya stared at the message, her hands shaking. Marco knew where they were, had known, apparently, exactly what Lorenzo would do in response to the attack, which meant Lorenzo wasn't surprising him with a counterattack. He was walking into whatever trap Marco had prepared. She tried calling Lorenzo. It went straight to voicemail. She tried the security team leader. Same result. They were already engaged, already moving, and she had no way to warn them that Marco had anticipated their every move. Arya made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She grabbed her jacket and the gun Lorenzo had left on the counter. The security team was outside, but they were watching for external threats, not expecting her to do something monumentally stupid. She slipped out the back door while they were doing a perimeter sweep, moving quickly through the narrow alley behind the townhouse. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Lorenzo had walked into a trap because he was trying to protect her, and she refused to sit safely in a house while he died for her. The city streets were dark and unfamiliar, but Arya had grown up here. She knew how to navigate, how to blend in, how to disappear when necessary. And right now, disappearing was the only thing keeping Marco's people from noticing her. She didn't have a plan beyond finding Lorenzo and warning him. Didn't know where he'd gone or how she'd get there. But standing still while he walked into an ambush wasn't an option her conscience could accept. Arya flagged down a cab 3 blocks away, her mind racing. Lorenzo's world operated in patterns, territories and safe houses and meeting places that stayed consistent because changing them meant vulnerability. If Marco knew about this safe house, he probably knew about Lorenzo's other locations too, which meant Lorenzo would go somewhere unexpected. Somewhere Marco wouldn't anticipate, and Arya knew exactly where that would be. The warehouse on Pier 9, the place Marco had mentioned on the phone, where Lorenzo conducted his darkest business. Marco had used it as a threat, as evidence of Lorenzo's brutality. But he'd revealed its existence in the process, which meant Lorenzo would never use it for actual operations now that his enemy knew about it. Unless that was exactly the point. Unless Lorenzo was using Marco's knowledge against him, choosing the one place Marco would dismiss as too obvious. Arya gave the cab driver an address near the waterfront and watched the city blur past, praying she was right. Praying she wasn't too late. Praying that her newly forming instincts for this world weren't leading her into the exact kind of danger Lorenzo had tried to protect her from. The warehouse district was deserted at this hour, nothing but shipping containers and industrial buildings locked up for the night. Arya paid the driver and walked the last 3 blocks on foot, her senses straining for any sign of Lorenzo's team. She found them positioned around a massive warehouse near the end of the pier, their vehicles hidden in shadows, weapons drawn and ready. Arya's heart leapt. She'd been right. Lorenzo was here, but so was someone else. Movement on the warehouse roof caught her eye. Snipers, at least 3 of them, positioned with clear sightlines to the entrances. Marco's people, waiting for Lorenzo to walk into their trap. Arya's breath caught. She was watching an ambush unfold in real time, and Lorenzo had no idea it was waiting for him. His team was focused on the warehouse itself, on threats at ground level. They weren't watching the roofs. She had to warn them. Had to. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind, cutting off her scream. Arya struggled instinctively, her training non-existent but her survival instinct fierce. An arm locked around her waist, lifting her off her feet, dragging her backward into the shadows between shipping containers. "Easy now," a familiar voice said in her ear. "You don't want to make a scene and get Lorenzo killed, do you?" Marco Santoro. Arya's blood turned to ice. "That's better," Marco said as she stopped fighting. "I'm going to move my hand, and you're going to stay very quiet. Understood?" Arya nodded. The hand over her mouth released, but the arm around her waist remained, keeping her pinned against Marco's chest. "There we go," he said pleasantly. "Now we can talk like civilized people." "Lorenzo's going to kill you for this," Arya said, her voice shaking. "Lorenzo's going to be too busy dying to worry about me." Marco turned her to face the warehouse, forcing her to watch. "See those snipers? The moment he enters that building, they take him out. Quick, clean, no chance for his people to respond. By this time tomorrow, I'll control everything he built." "You won't get away with this." "I already have." Marco's breath was warm against her ear, making her skin crawl. "And you, my dear, are going to help me consolidate power. Lorenzo's widow choosing to align with his successor, it sends a powerful message to anyone thinking about resistance. I'd rather die." "No, you wouldn't. You're a survivor, Arya. I saw it at the gala, saw it when you rejected my offer, even though part of you wanted to accept. You'll do whatever it takes to stay alive, including working with me." He was wrong, had to be wrong. But Arya's mind was already calculating, already understanding that she was standing at the exact precipice Lorenzo had warned her about. The moment when principles collided with survival and only one could win. Below them, Lorenzo emerged from his vehicle, moving toward the warehouse with his team in formation around him. He had no idea about the snipers, no idea that Marco was watching, no idea that Arya was being held in the shadows, forced to witness his execution. She had seconds to make a choice that would define everything that came after. Arya drove her elbow back as hard as she could, connecting with Marco's ribs. His grip loosened just enough for her to twist free, and she ran, not away from the danger, but toward it. "Lorenzo!" Her scream shattered the night's silence. "Snipers on the roof! It's a trap!" Everything happened at once. Lorenzo's head snapped toward her voice, his eyes widening in recognition and horror. His team scattered, weapons training upward as the snipers adjusted their aim, and Marco's hand grabbed Arya's jacket, yanking her backward with brutal force. She heard gunfire, heard Lorenzo shouting commands, heard the chaos of an ambush turn firefight, and felt Marco's gun press against her temple, cold and absolute. "Well," he said, his pleasant tone gone. "That was unexpected. Tell me, Arya, do you think Lorenzo will hesitate to shoot if you're my shield? Because I'm betting he won't. I'm betting you'll learn tonight exactly how little you actually mean to him." Arya's entire body trembled, but she forced herself to meet Marco's eyes. "You're wrong, and you just made the worst mistake of your life." "We'll see about that." Marco raised his voice, shouting across the pier. "Lorenzo, let's talk about terms of surrender." The gunfire stopped. In the sudden silence, Arya could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the cold metal of the gun against her skin, could see Lorenzo standing in the open with murder in his eyes and a weapon trained directly at them. This was the moment, the choice, the transformation Lorenzo had warned her about, and Arya made her decision without hesitation. "Shoot," she said clearly. "Lorenzo, shoot him. Don't worry about me. Just take the shot." Marco's gun pressed harder against her temple. "She's bluffing." "I'm not." Arya kept her gaze locked on Lorenzo's. "He's using me as a shield. But if you kill him, his people scatter. The threat ends. So take the shot." Lorenzo's expression was unreadable, his weapon steady. For a long moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The entire world balanced on the edge of a trigger pull. Then Lorenzo's gun barked once, the sound impossibly loud in the silence. And everything went dark. Arya's ears rang from the gunshot, the sound reverberating through her skull like a physical blow. For one terrible moment, she thought Lorenzo had missed, that the bullet had found her instead of Marco. But then she felt Marco's grip on her jacket loosen, felt his body weight shift and stumble backward, and she understood. Lorenzo had taken the shot, through her, past her, threading a needle in the dark with her life hanging in the balance. And he hadn't missed. Marco hit the ground hard, clutching his shoulder where Lorenzo's bullet had torn through muscle and bone. His gun clattered away across the concrete, and Arya stood frozen between them, alive, unharmed, trembling so violently she could barely stay on her feet. Lorenzo was moving before Marco fully collapsed, his team converging on the wounded man with weapons drawn. But Lorenzo's attention was entirely on Arya, his face carved from stone as he closed the distance between them in long strides. "Are you hurt?" His hands were on her immediately, checking for injuries with frantic precision. "Did he hurt you?" "Arya, talk to me." "I'm fine." Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "You shot him. You told me to." Lorenzo's hands framed her face, forcing her to look at him. "You told me to take the shot, so I did. But if I'd been wrong, if that bullet had been half an inch to the left..." He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. Arya saw the truth written in his expression, the terror he'd felt pulling that trigger, the calculation he'd made in a split second, the choice between her safety and ending the threat. And he'd chosen to trust her judgment, to believe she knew what she was asking for. "I knew you wouldn't miss," Arya said, her hands covering his where they rested against her cheeks. "I knew you'd make the shot. Your faith in me is terrifying." Lorenzo pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with crushing force. She felt the rapid hammer of his heartbeat, felt the tremor in his hands that betrayed how close to losing control he actually was. "What were you thinking coming here? I told you to stay at the safe house." "Marco sent me a message. He knew where we were, knew what you'd do. I had to warn you." Arya pressed her face into his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, gunpowder and cologne and something essentially Lorenzo. "I couldn't just sit there while you walked into a trap. So instead you walked into one yourself." Lorenzo pulled back enough to look at her, and the anger in his expression was undercut by something that looked disturbingly like pride. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Can it be both?" Despite everything, Lorenzo's mouth twitched. "Apparently." Then his expression hardened, the brief moment of vulnerability closing off. "But we're discussing this later, right? Right now..." A commotion from where Marco lay bleeding interrupted him. Arya turned to see Marco struggling against the men holding him down, his face twisted with pain and rage. "This isn't over, Lorenzo." Marco's voice was strained but defiant. "Kill me, and my people will never stop coming for you, for her. You've started a war you can't win." Lorenzo released Arya and moved toward Marco with the controlled grace of a predator approaching wounded prey. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and absolutely lethal. "Your people are already dealt with. While you were planning this little ambush, I was dismantling your entire operation. Your warehouses, raided. Your accounts, frozen. Your lieutenants, currently being offered very generous terms to switch their loyalty." Lorenzo crouched beside Marco, meeting his eyes with cold satisfaction. "You never had a chance, Marco. This was over before it started." Marco's expression shifted from defiance to dawning comprehension. "The warehouse, this was a trap." "Yes." Lorenzo's smile was sharp enough to cut. "Did you really think I wouldn't know about the snipers? That I wouldn't anticipate your every move the same way you anticipated mine?" He stood, looking down at his former associate with something like disappointment. "I trained you better than this. You got arrogant, sloppy, and now you're finished. You're going to kill me." It wasn't a question. Eventually, Lorenzo's tone was conversational, but the menace underneath was palpable. "But first, you're going to give me the names of everyone who supported you in this. Every person who thought challenging me was a good idea. Every connection you used, every resource you tapped. And then," he paused, his gaze flicking to Arya, "then I'm going to let my wife decide what happens to you." Arya's breath caught. Every eye turned to her, Lorenzo's team, the captured snipers being marched down from the roof, and Marco himself, disbelief written across his features. "You're joking," Marco said. "I never joke about business." Lorenzo moved back to Arya, his hand settling on her lower back. "You threatened her. Used her as leverage. Put a gun to her head. She gets to decide your fate." The power of it was dizzying. Arya understood what Lorenzo was offering, not just revenge, but agency. The choice to show mercy or demand justice, to prove herself capable of the hard decisions this world required. Marco had been right about one thing. She was a survivor. But he'd been wrong about what that meant. "I want him alive," Arya said clearly. "Not out of mercy, but because killing him makes him a martyr. His people can rally around that, use it to justify continued attacks." She met Marco's eyes, saw the surprise there. But keeping him alive, broken and powerless, proof that challenging Lorenzo ends in complete destruction, that sends a message that lasts. Silence followed her words. Then Lorenzo's hand tightened on her back, and she knew she'd passed some test she hadn't fully understood she was taking. "You heard her," Lorenzo said to his team. "Get him medical attention, then lock him down. Maximum security. No visitors, no communications. He lives the rest of his life knowing he failed." Marco's face went pale. Death would have been easier, cleaner. What Arya had sentenced him to was worse, a living example of what happened to Lorenzo's enemies. "You've become one of them," Marco said, his voice hollow. "Congratulations, Arya. You're a monster now, just like him." The words should have hurt, should have made her question herself. But Arya looked at the man who'd held a gun to her head, who tried to use her as a pawn in his game for power, and felt nothing but cold certainty. "No," she said. "I've become something worse. I'm a monster who chose this path instead of having it forced on me. That makes me far more dangerous than you ever anticipated." Lorenzo's team moved Marco away, his protests fading into the night. The snipers followed, disarmed and defeated, and gradually, the pier emptied until it was just Arya and Lorenzo standing in the aftermath of a war that had lasted less than a week but had changed everything. "That was quite a speech," Lorenzo said quietly. "I meant every word." Arya turned to face him fully. "He was right, you know. I have become something different, someone I wouldn't have recognized a week ago. Is that a problem?" "I don't know yet." She looked down at her hands, half expecting to see blood, even though she hadn't pulled a trigger. "I told you to shoot through me, sentenced a man to a fate worse than death, and I don't feel guilty about either choice. That should terrify me." "But it doesn't." "No, it doesn't." Arya met his gaze. "What does that make me?" Lorenzo stepped closer, his hand settling on her waist with the same possessive certainty he'd shown since the moment they'd met. It makes you someone who understands the reality of survival. Someone who can make hard choices without falling apart afterward. Someone, he paused, something shifting in his expression. Someone I can actually trust to stand beside me instead of behind me. The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Lorenzo had spent their entire marriage trying to protect her, to keep her separate from his world's darkness. But tonight, Arya had proven she could navigate that darkness herself, could make the brutal calculations required to survive it. "I'm not sure that's a compliment," Arya said. "It's the highest one I can give." Lorenzo's thumb traced patterns on her hip through her jacket. "You could have stayed hidden, could have let Marco take me out and then accepted whatever he offered. But you didn't. You ran toward the danger, warned me about the trap, and then made the choice that kept both of us alive. I couldn't let you die for me, not when I had the power to stop it. Even though it meant becoming complicit in violence, even though it meant crossing a line you can never uncross." Arya thought about that, about the woman she'd been a week ago, standing at an altar in a dress that felt like a shroud. That woman wouldn't have survived tonight, wouldn't have made the choices necessary to turn Marco's trap against him. But that woman was gone, dead and buried under the weight of hard lessons and harder truths. "I crossed that line the moment I married you," she said finally. "Everything after was just accepting the reality of where I already stood." Lorenzo's expression softened into something that might have been respect, or might have been something deeper. "You're extraordinary, you know that?" "I'm adapting, that's all." "No." His hands tightened on her waist. "Adapting is surviving. What you did tonight, that was conquering. There's a difference." Before Arya could respond, his phone buzzed. Lorenzo checked it, his expression shifting to satisfaction. Marco's operations are completely dismantled. His people are either in custody or have already switched sides. His financial backing has evaporated. He looked up at Arya. "It's over. The threat's eliminated." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Well, Lorenzo pocketed his phone. "I told you. I was dismantling his organization while he was focused on this ambush. He thought he was hunting me, but I was the one setting the trap. His attack on the penthouse, the chase to the safe house, even him knowing our location, all of it was designed to make him feel in control while I systematically destroyed everything he'd built." Arya processed this, understanding clicking into place. "You used me as bait." "I used us both as bait." Lorenzo's gaze didn't waver. "And I knew it was dangerous, knew there was a chance something would go wrong. But I also knew that Marco's arrogance would make him focus on the visible threat, me protecting you, while missing the larger strategy. You could have told me. Would you have played your part as convincingly if you'd known it was theater? Probably not. Arya's fear had been real, her desperation genuine, and that authenticity had sold the performance, had made Marco believe he was winning right up until the moment Lorenzo's trap closed around him. "I hate that you're right," she said. "I hate that I had to use you that way." Lorenzo pulled her closer until they were pressed together in the shadows of the warehouse district. "But I'd do it again if it meant keeping you safe in the long run. That's who I am, Arya. That's who I'll always be." She should have been angry, should have felt manipulated and betrayed. But standing there in the aftermath of violence, with the smell of gunpowder still in the air and the memory of Lorenzo's bullet whistling past her head, Arya found she understood. This was Lorenzo's world, and if she was going to survive in it, not just survive, but thrive, she needed to accept that deception and strategy were as much tools of survival as weapons and violence. "Take me home," she said. Lorenzo's expression flickered with surprise. "Home?" "The penthouse. I assume it's been repaired by now, knowing your efficiency." Arya reached up, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Take me home, Lorenzo. I'm tired of running and hiding. I want to sleep in my own bed in the home I apparently share with you now." Something fierce and possessive flared in Lorenzo's eyes. "Our home," he corrected. "Not mine. Ours." The word settled over Arya like a brand. Our home. Our life. Our future bound together by choices made and lines crossed. She'd stopped being Lorenzo's prisoner, somewhere between the wedding and tonight, had transformed from captive to partner through trial and fire, and decisions that redefined who she was at her core. "Our home," she agreed. "Let's go." The drive back was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. Lorenzo's hand found hers in the darkness of the SUV, his fingers threading through hers with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence they'd just survived. Arya stared out the window as the city passed by. This place she'd lived her entire life but was only now truly seeing. Every street corner could hide one of Lorenzo's people or his enemies. Every business might be a front for something darker. The city was a chessboard, and she'd just learned she was a player rather than a piece. The penthouse had indeed been repaired. The windows replaced, the damage erased, everything returned to its pristine state as if the attack had never happened. But Arya knew better now. Knew that the surface polish hid the violence underneath, that beauty and brutality were two sides of the same coin in Lorenzo's world. Their world, she corrected herself. She was part of this now, complicit and committed in ways that couldn't be undone. Lorenzo's security team swept the penthouse before allowing them entry, but the precaution felt almost routine now. This was their life. Constant vigilance, perpetual awareness of threats, security as a fact of existence rather than an exception. When they were finally alone, Lorenzo moved to pour himself a drink. He held up the bottle in silent question, and Arya nodded. They stood at the window overlooking the city, glasses in hand, watching the lights that represented millions of lives being lived in ignorance of the war that had just concluded in their midst. "What happens now?" Arya asked. "Now we consolidate. Make sure everyone understands that challenging me comes with consequences they can't afford." Lorenzo took a drink. "There will be meetings, demonstrations of power, strategic alliances reinforced, the usual aftermath of conflict. And Marco will live the rest of his life in a cell, exactly as you prescribed, a warning to anyone else who thinks about following his path." Lorenzo turned to look at her. "You made the right call, by the way. Keeping him alive sends a stronger message than killing him would have." "I know." Arya sipped her drink, the burn of expensive whiskey grounding her. "I'm learning how to think like you. Not sure if that's progress or corruption. Maybe it's both." Lorenzo set his glass down and moved behind her, his arms coming around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You're not the woman I married last week?" "No, I'm not." "Are you mourning her, the person you used to be?" Arya considered the question seriously. The girl who'd stood at that altar had been innocent in ways that felt almost naive now. She'd believed in clear lines between right and wrong, in justice and morality, and the idea that good people didn't make compromises. But that girl couldn't have survived tonight, couldn't have made the choices that kept them both breathing. "No," Arya said finally. "I'm not mourning her. She was too weak for this world. What I am is angry that I had to change it all, that you forced this transformation by dragging me into your life." "Fair enough." Lorenzo's arms tightened around her. "For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not for marrying you, I'd make that choice again. But for the pain the transformation caused, that part, I regret." It was the closest thing to an apology Lorenzo had ever offered, and Arya understood the weight of it. Men like him didn't apologize, didn't admit regret. The fact that he was doing so now meant something. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "What?" "No more secrets. No more using me as bait without telling me. If we're partners, really partners, then I need to know the full picture. I need to be able to make informed choices instead of just reacting to situations you've engineered." Lorenzo was quiet for a long moment, and Arya could feel the calculation happening behind her, the weighing of control against trust. "All right," he said finally. "No more secrets about operations that involve you. Complete transparency about threats and strategies. You'll know everything I know. And in return? In return, you commit, fully. No more questioning whether you belong in this world. No more hesitation about what needs to be done. If we're doing this, really doing this, then I need to know you're all in." Arya turned in his arms to face him, searching his expression for any sign of manipulation. But Lorenzo's dark eyes were sincere, his face open in a way she'd never seen before. This was the choice that mattered, not the wedding that had been forced on her, but this moment, this decision to consciously step into his world instead of being dragged into it. "I'm all in," Arya said. "No more running. No more pretending this is temporary. This is my life now, and I'm choosing to embrace it." Lorenzo's expression shifted into something that might have been relief or triumph or both. Then he was kissing her, and this time there was no desperation or adrenaline fueling it. just certainty and heat and the promise of something neither of them had anticipated when this started. When they finally broke apart, Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "You terrify me, you know that?" "Good. You've terrified me since the moment we met. It's only fair." "That's not what I mean." His hands framed her face, thumbs stroking her cheekbones. "I mean, you've become the one thing I never thought I'd have, a weakness I can't afford to lose. If something happened to you now, after everything—" He didn't finish, but Arya understood. She'd become essential to him somewhere along the way, transformed from asset to liability to something far more dangerous, someone he actually cared about. "Then we protect each other," she said simply. "You keep me alive with your strategies and resources. I keep you grounded with my honesty and perspective. We survive together." "Together," Lorenzo repeated, testing the word. Then he smiled, and it was real. No calculation, no performance, just genuine warmth. "I can work with that." They moved through the penthouse together, comfortable in a way that would have seemed impossible a week ago. Lorenzo made calls to his various operations, confirming that Marco's organization was fully dismantled and absorbed. Arya listened, learning the language of his business, understanding the mechanisms of power that kept his empire running. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with both of them. They ended up in Lorenzo's room by unspoken agreement, the line between his space and hers finally erased completely. Arya fell asleep wrapped in Lorenzo's arms, feeling safer than she had any right to feel given the violence they'd survived. But safety wasn't about the absence of danger anymore. It was about having someone beside you who understood the threats and knew how to fight them. When morning came, Arya woke to find Lorenzo already awake, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" she asked, just thinking about how much has changed in a week. His fingers traced idle patterns on her shoulder. "I married a stranger because she represented strategic value. Woke up this morning next to a partner who's proven herself more valuable than any business connection could be." "Careful, Lorenzo. That almost sounded romantic." "Maybe it was." He pulled her closer. "I'm not good at this. At feelings, at connection, at anything that isn't strategy and calculation. But with you—" He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "With you, I want to be better. Want to build something that's more than just mutual survival." Arya's breath caught. This was Lorenzo at his most vulnerable, admitting to desires that went beyond the practical arrangements they'd discussed. "What are you saying?" she asked carefully. "I'm saying this started as a transaction, but it doesn't have to stay that way. We could build something real, Arya, a partnership based on choice rather than coercion, on trust rather than control." His dark eyes searched hers. "If you're willing to try." It should have been too soon. Should have felt like another manipulation, another way for Lorenzo to secure her loyalty. But Arya looked at the man who'd trusted her enough to take an impossible shot, who'd offered her full transparency in his operations, who'd just admitted to wanting more than a business arrangement, and she saw something worth exploring. "I'm willing to try," she said. "But Lorenzo, this only works if we're equals. Not captor and captive, not even protector and protected. Equals. Partners in every sense." "Equals," Lorenzo agreed. "I can do that." "Can you? Because your entire life has been about control, about being the most powerful person in any room. Can you actually share power with me?" "Honestly, I don't know." His answer was refreshingly direct. "But I'm willing to learn if you're willing to be patient with the process." Arya considered that. Lorenzo was offering her something precious, the chance to shape their relationship into something neither of them had planned for. It wouldn't be easy. There would be missteps and conflicts and moments when his instinct for control clashed with her demand for autonomy. But they'd survived worse together in the past week. "All right," she said. "We'll figure it out as we go. But Lorenzo, if this is going to work, you need to understand something. I'm not the woman you married. I won't be controlled or managed or protected like a valuable asset. I'm going to push back, question your decisions, demand my own role in your operations." "I know. That's what makes you perfect for this." Lorenzo's smile was sharp and genuine. "I don't want another subordinate, Arya. I want an equal. Someone who can challenge me, who sees through my strategies, who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong." "Then that's what you'll get." Arya kissed him, sealing the agreement between them. "Equals. Partners. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The weeks that followed proved the truth of their commitment. Lorenzo brought Arya into his operations gradually but completely, teaching her the business, introducing her to key players, letting her sit in on meetings where decisions worth millions were made. She learned to read the subtle cues that indicated threats, to spot weaknesses in competitors' strategies, to understand the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined Lorenzo's world. And she contributed. Her outside perspective caught things Lorenzo's people missed. Her different approach to problems yielded solutions they hadn't considered. She wasn't just Lorenzo's wife anymore. She was becoming a force in the organization in her own right. The training Lorenzo had promised began immediately. Arya learned to shoot properly, to fight when necessary, to defend herself against the kinds of threats that came with being Lorenzo Vieri's partner. She would never match his security team's expertise, but she developed competence that meant she wasn't a liability in crisis situations. More importantly, she learned the subtler skills: how to read people's intentions, how to spot deception, how to navigate social situations where every word was a potential weapon. These were the skills that kept you alive in Lorenzo's world, and Arya absorbed them with the focused intensity of someone who understood the stakes. Their relationship evolved too. The forced proximity of their marriage transformed into genuine partnership, and somewhere along the way, the partnership developed into something deeper. Arya caught herself seeking Lorenzo's opinion not because she had to, but because she valued his perspective. Found herself thinking of the penthouse as home rather than a prison. Realized that the man she'd hated a month ago had become someone she trusted with her life. And Lorenzo changed as well. His control obsession loosened, not completely but enough to matter. He asked Arya's opinion instead of simply informing her of decisions. Shared power in ways that would have seemed impossible when they first married. Proved through actions rather than words that he viewed her as an equal. It wasn't perfect. They fought. Fierce arguments about strategy and autonomy and the lingering power imbalances from how their relationship started. But they fought as equals now, and they learned to compromise, to find middle ground between Lorenzo's need for control and Arya's demand for independence. 3 months after their wedding, Arya stood in Lorenzo's office reviewing financial reports when Elena appeared with a message. "Mrs. Vieri, there's someone here to see you, your father." Arya's hand stilled on the papers. She hadn't spoken to Marcus Vallon since the wedding, had deliberately cut off all contact with the man who'd sold her to settle his debts. The fact that he was showing up now felt significant. "Where is he?" she asked. "Downstairs lobby. Security wouldn't let him up without your permission." Smart of them. Arya set the reports aside and moved to the window, looking down at the city below. Her father was down there somewhere, probably desperate if he'd worked up the courage to come here. Lorenzo appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to." "I know." Arya turned to face him. "But I think I need to. There are things that need to be said." "Want me to come with you?" She almost said yes. Having Lorenzo's intimidating presence beside her would make the conversation easier. But this was something she needed to do alone, needed to prove to herself that she could face her father as the woman she'd become rather than the daughter he'd betrayed. "No," she said, "but stay close, just in case." Lorenzo nodded, understanding in his expression. Arya took the elevator down to the lobby, her heart beating faster with each floor. When the doors opened, she saw Marcus immediately, sitting on one of the expensive couches, looking smaller and older than she remembered. He stood when he saw her, hope and fear warring on his face. "Arya, thank you for seeing me. I haven't decided if I'm actually seeing you yet." She kept her distance, studying the man who'd raised her and then traded her away. "What do you want?" "I wanted to apologize, to explain." "There's nothing to explain. You owed Lorenzo money you couldn't pay, so you offered me as collateral. The only explanation I need is whether you feel any remorse for that choice." Marcus flinched. "Of course I do. You are my daughter. I was your daughter. Now I'm Lorenzo Vieri's wife and partner. That happened the moment you signed me away." Arya's voice was cold, controlled. She'd learned from the best. "So again, what do you want?" "I heard about what happened with Marco Santoro. Heard that you were involved, that you—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. "I heard you've changed, that you're becoming one of them." "One of them," Arya repeated. "You mean a survivor? Someone who understands how this world actually works instead of pretending there are easy answers?" She stepped closer, letting Marcus see the transformation in her eyes. "Yes, I've changed. Your betrayal taught me that morality is a luxury and trust is a weapon. Lorenzo taught me how to turn those lessons into strength. Arya, you don't have to do this. I can help you get out, get away from him. I don't want to get away from him. The truth of it surprised even Arya, but she didn't hesitate. Lorenzo gave me something you never did. Honest partnership. He doesn't pretend to be protecting me while really protecting himself. He doesn't make promises he can't keep, and he's never lied about what he is or what he's asking me to become. He's a criminal, a killer. Yes, and I've made peace with that because at least he owns it. Arya met her father's eyes without flinching. You want to know the difference between you and Lorenzo? He forced me into this marriage to serve his interests, but he's never pretended it was for my own good. You sold me and called it protection. I'll take honest exploitation over comfortable lies every time. Marcus's face crumpled. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry for what I did to you. Arya felt nothing looking at her father's regret. No satisfaction, no vindication, just cold assessment of whether his apology served any useful purpose. Your apology is noted, she said finally, but it changes nothing. We're done, Marcus. I don't want your guilt or your attempts at reconciliation. I don't want anything from you except distance. Please, Arya, go home. Rebuild your life without me in it, and don't come back here. She turned toward the elevator, then paused. Oh, and Marcus, your debt to Lorenzo is paid. Consider that your severance package from my old life. You'll never owe him again, but you'll also never have access to me or anything I build going forward. She left him standing in the lobby, his protest fading as the elevator doors closed. When she reached the penthouse, Lorenzo was waiting, concern in his expression. How did it go? He asked. It went exactly as it needed to. Arya moved into his arms, letting herself take comfort in his solid presence. I don't need closure from him. I already have everything I need here. Lorenzo held her close, his hand stroking through her hair. You're sure about that? About choosing this life permanently? I'm sure. Arya pulled back to look at him. I'm not pretending this is perfect, or that I don't sometimes miss the simplicity of my old life. But I know who I am now, what I'm capable of. And I built that with you through everything we survived together. But together, Lorenzo echoed, the word carrying weight it hadn't held at the beginning. I like the sound of that. So do I. They stood there in the penthouse that had transformed from prison to home, looking out at the city where they'd fought and survived and ultimately chosen each other despite everything that should have kept them apart. Arya Valen, now truly Arya Vieri, had started this journey as a prisoner forced into marriage she never wanted. But somewhere between the coercion and the violence and the impossible choices, she'd become something else entirely. Not a victim, not a prisoner, but a partner to a dangerous man, and dangerous in her own right. The transformation had cost her innocence and certainty and the comfortable belief that the world was divided neatly into good and evil. But it had given her something more valuable, agency, power, and a partnership built on brutal honesty rather than comfortable lies. What are you thinking? Lorenzo asked, studying her expression. I'm thinking that if someone had told me 3 months ago that I'd be standing here, genuinely content in a marriage that started as coercion, I would have called them insane. And now? Now I understand that sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the catalyst for becoming who we were always meant to be. Arya turned in his arms to face the window, looking out at their domain. You didn't rescue me, Lorenzo. You broke me down and forced me to rebuild myself stronger. I'm not sure if I should hate you or thank you for that. You can do both. His arms tightened around her waist. I did terrible things to you in the name of strategy and survival. But those terrible things also revealed who you really are beneath the person you thought you had to be. So hate me for the method, but recognize the result. It was the most honest assessment of their relationship either of them had voiced. Lorenzo had destroyed her old life, yes, but in doing so, he'd freed her from limitations she hadn't known existed. And she'd proven herself capable of not just surviving his world, but conquering it. No more running, Arya said, echoing words she'd spoken before. No more pretending this is temporary or forced. This is my choice now, to stand beside you, to build this empire together, to face whatever comes next as equals. No more running, Lorenzo agreed. Whatever comes next, we face it together. And there in the penthouse above the city, Two people who should have been enemies, captor and captive, criminal and innocent, stood united by choice rather than coercion. The road that brought them together had been paved with violence and betrayal and transformation that neither had anticipated. But they'd walked that road and emerged as partners, bound not by rings or vows or strategy, but by the brutal honesty of having seen each other at their worst and choosing connection anyway. The future would bring new challenges, new threats, new moments when they'd have to choose between principles and survival. But they would face those moments together, two forces forged in fire into something neither could have become alone. Arya had entered Lorenzo's world as payment for another man's sins. She remained there by her own choice, having discovered that freedom wasn't about escaping chains, it was about choosing which ones you wore and why. And she had chosen this. Chosen him. Chosen the dangerous, complicated, brutally honest partnership they'd built from the wreckage of coercion and compromise. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she'd earned, one impossible choice at a time. And that, Arya realized as Lorenzo's arms tightened around her and the city glittered below them like a promise, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.